Hey, Austin here, and in this video we will talk about the most terrifying and brutal shark attacks ever recorded. From an illegal Perth who paid an illegal charter to put him in the water with one of the largest great white sharks to a surfer's deadly encounter in a predator-infested channel at dusk. The morning of July 22, 2014 arrived cold and gray over South Australia's coastline. Winter at the Neptune Islands comes off the Southern Ocean in long, flat waves of cold that sit in your chest long after you have gone back inside. The water was dark. The sky was darker. It was not a place that invited you. It was a place that tolerated you, briefly, on its own terms. Daniel Kessler had told himself that many times, and found it thrilling every time. Daniel was 38. A financial analyst from Perth who had spent the better part of his adult life inside spreadsheets and boardrooms. He was sharp, methodical, and by every professional measure, successful. But success had come at a cost he hadn't anticipated, a creeping restlessness that no salary could quiet. He had started small, a skydiving course on a long weekend. He believed, with the conviction of someone who had never truly been wrong, that risk was simply a variable, one that could be managed if the right professionals were involved. That belief is what led him to the wrong boat. It wasn't one of the licensed operators. The vessel was smaller, the paperwork thinner, and the pitch far more seductive. A more immersive shark experience, they called it. No cages, no barriers, just you and the ocean. Legitimate Neptune Islands operators are bound by strict regulations. Cage diving only, controlled chumming, no free-swimming clients in active chum water. This charter operated outside all of that. The crew spoke with the confidence of people who had done this before and gotten away with it. Daniel liked the sound of what they were selling. He signed what they put in front of him and didn't ask the questions he should have. Chumming had already begun by the time they reached the site, a slow bleed of scent trailing into deep water. The crew moved with the casual efficiency of people running an operation that existed in the gap between what was permitted and what was possible. Daniel suited up, entered the water near the vessel, and for a while, everything felt exactly as he had imagined it. Then, at the edge of visibility, a shape appeared, large, slow, almost elegant in the way it moved. Wide, unhurried circles that seemed almost indifferent to his presence. He watched it. It watched him. He raised his camera. That was when he drifted. It happened gradually, the way most fatal mistakes do, not in a single moment of recklessness, but in a slow accumulation of small inattentions. He was focused on the frame, on the angle, on capturing something extraordinary. He didn't notice how far he had moved from the boat. He didn't notice that he had turned his back to open water. He didn't notice that the shark's wide, patient circles had been getting smaller with every pass. The strike came from below with no warning. The shark accelerated from depth in a single explosive burst, an upward ambush, the full mechanical force of nearly 5 meters of animal hitting him from underneath. The bite was catastrophic, his lower body. The shark released almost immediately, the way great whites do, and pulled away into the dark water below. Daniel surfaced. The crew was already moving, shouting, the engine turning over. The water around him had changed color. His body understood what had happened before his mind could form the thought. He did not have long. The injuries from that single strike were not survivable. Blood loss and shock worked faster than the boat could close the distance. Western Australian authorities launched an investigation within days. The charter operator was identified, the vessel impounded, and the business shut down permanently. The operator faced criminal charges related to negligent conduct and operating without the required licensing. Back in Perth, Daniel's family held a private service. It was June 3rd, 2017. The afternoon sun beating down on the flat expanse of the Gulf of Mexico, several miles off the remote stretch of Padre Island National Seashore, when a white cooler slipped from the deck and splashed into the chum-streaked water. Matteo Rinza was a 41-year-old refrigeration repairman from Corpus Christi who had organized the fishing trip with 2 friends from his bowling league. He was known for being practical and resourceful, the kind of man who fixed his own truck and never hired out work he could do himself. The cooler that went overboard was his, a $200 Yeti he had saved for months to purchase, packed with the day's catch of red snapper and kingfish along with 40 pounds of ice. The Gulf waters around Padre Island are murky year-round, with visibility rarely exceeding 10 feet even on calm days. The warm currents and abundant bait fish make it prime feeding grounds for bull sharks, one of the most aggressive shark species in existence. Bull sharks can grow to 11 feet in length and weigh approximately 450 pounds, with a bite force exceeding 1,300 pounds per square inch. Unlike most sharks, they thrive in shallow, murky water, where their gray coloring renders them nearly invisible. The group had been chumming the water for 3 hours, tossing cut bait and fish parts overboard to attract game fish. The cooler had been sitting on the gunnel, inadequately secured, when a wave rocked the boat and sent it tumbling into the Gulf. It floated 15 feet from the stern, clearly visible and drifting slowly with the current. Mateo's friends immediately told him to wait, that they could hook it back with a gaff pole or net. One of them, a man named Dennis Cruz, specifically mentioned sharks. They had seen a large shadow pass under the boat 20 minutes earlier, but Mateo was already kicking off his deck shoes, insisting it would take 30 seconds. Mateo ignored the Coast Guard recommendation to wear a personal flotation device while entering chummed waters. The water was only chest deep where they were anchored, he reasoned, and the cooler was already moving away. He did not hesitate. He jumped in feet first, creating a splash that sent ripples across the calm surface. The water was warmer than expected, greenish-brown and opaque. Mateo began swimming with strong strokes toward the cooler, which had drifted another 10 feet. His friends watched from the boat, one holding the gaff pole uselessly, the other scanning the water with growing unease. Mateo reached the drifting cooler within seconds, his hand closing around the handle. He turned back toward the boat, treading water, preparing to swim one-handed while towing the cooler behind him. From the boat, Dennis saw it first, a wide shadow passing beneath Mateo's kicking legs, moving with purpose. He opened his mouth to shout a warning, but the words caught in his throat as the shadow accelerated upward. The bull shark surged from below with explosive force, its blunt snout ramming into Mateo before its jaws clamped around his midsection. The impact was visible from the boat. Mateo's entire body lurched upward, folding sideways across the shark's snout as teeth sank into his thigh and abdominal area, tearing through muscle and tissue. The bite was crushing, immediate, and catastrophic. The shark's jaws exerted over 1,300 pounds of pressure, puncturing skin, muscle, and into the abdominal cavity. Mateo's scream was sharp and wet, cut short as the animal held him briefly in its jaws, then began to move. The shark executed violent thrashing and twisting to tear chunks of flesh, pulling Mateo's upper legs and lower torso. The witnesses on the boat leaned over the gunwale, screaming his name, watching helplessly as the water erupted in thrashing chaos. Mateo's arms and portions of his legs appeared above the water sporadically, but most of the attack was obscured by churning water and blood. The cooler, still floating nearby, rocked in the waves created by the violence. One of the men on the boat threw a rope instinctively, a pointless gesture, but his hands were shaking too badly to aim. The rope landed 6 feet short and floated uselessly. After approximately 15 seconds of sustained thrashing, the surface went eerily still. The shark had released what remained of Mateo and descended into deeper water. All that was visible were expanding patches of red water, floating ice that had spilled from the cooler, and a few pieces of torn fabric from his shirt. No body surfaced. The men stared at the empty water, both shouting Mateo's name, but there was no response, no movement, except the gentle rocking of waves. Dennis grabbed the VHF radio with trembling hands and transmitted a mayday call on Channel 16. The Coast Guard responded immediately, dispatching a 45-foot response boat. They arrived on scene approximately 22 minutes after the distress call. Coast Guard personnel conducted a search pattern around the coordinates provided, scanning for any sign of Mateo. Approximately 35 minutes into the search, crew members located remains floating 400 yards southeast of the attack location. The body had been massively mangled with severe trauma to the abdomen and thighs, showing torn flesh and partial separation of the lower torso. The upper and lower halves had been separated either by multiple feeding passes or post-mortem scavenging. Mateo's funeral was held 4 days later in Corpus Christi, attended by over 100 people from his workplace, church, and bowling league. His two friends who witnessed the attack both quietly discontinued their annual fishing trips. It was July 22, 2018, on a sweltering Sunday afternoon at New Smyrna Beach, Florida. The beach holds the dubious distinction of being the shark bite capital of the world, recording more shark incidents annually than any other region on Earth. The vast majority involve small blacktip and spinner sharks, but the area also attracts larger and more dangerous species, including bull sharks. The temperature was 92 degrees with high humidity. A tropical storm 200 miles offshore had generated strong rip currents. Red warning flags were posted, but the beach remained open. The water was murky brown-green with visibility estimated at less than 5 feet. Kira West, a 33-year-old emergency room nurse, had driven to the beach for a day trip on her day off. A strong swimmer and former high school swim team captain, Kira had completed multiple open water rescue and CPR certifications. She was calm under pressure and trained in water rescue techniques. Engaged to be married in 2 months, she was known for her selfless nature and instinct to help others. Accompanying her was David Grant, her 35-year-old fiancé, who was uncomfortable in ocean conditions. David had expressed concerns about shark activity, but Kira wanted to swim before their wedding preparations intensified. They arrived around 2 in the afternoon. The beach was crowded with approximately 200 people in the water. Kira entered the water around 2:30 and swam parallel to shore, staying in waist-to-chest deep water approximately 40 yards from the beach. Also at the beach that afternoon was the Patterson family from Ohio. Their 11-year-old son Tommy was an inexperienced ocean swimmer accustomed only to pools and lakes. He wore inflatable arm floaties. While his parents were setting up beach chairs, Tommy wandered away and entered the water alone. Bull sharks are considered one of the most dangerous shark species due to their aggressive nature, powerful jaws, and ability to thrive in both saltwater and freshwater environments. They are responsible for more attacks on humans than any other species, except great white sharks. Reaching lengths of 7 to 11 feet, bull sharks are stocky animals with blunt snouts, housing powerful jaws filled with triangular teeth designed for crushing and tearing. They are opportunistic feeders, known for investigating any unusual activity. July is peak season when shark activity is elevated due to warm water temperatures of 84 degrees. Unknown to anyone, a 9-foot bull shark had been hunting in the area for the past hour, cruising parallel to shore at a depth of 10 to 12 feet, feeding on stingrays and small fish. Around 3:40, Tommy entered the water and waded out to knee-deep water. A wave knocked him off balance, and he stumbled into deeper water. Within seconds, a strong rip current began pulling him away from shore. Tommy panicked and began thrashing his arms and screaming for help. His floaties kept him at the surface, but he was being pulled rapidly away. Kira was approximately 50 yards from Tommy when she heard his screams. She immediately saw the boy struggling, now 60 yards from shore. She did not hesitate. Without alerting the lifeguard or David, she dove forward and began swimming toward Tommy with powerful strokes. The lifeguard's attention was divided among multiple swimmers in distress along the crowded shoreline, involving a swimmer with a jellyfish sting further down the beach. The crowd noise and crashing waves masked Tommy's initial cries. Kira reached Tommy within minutes. The boy was in full panic, his arms flailing wildly and legs kicking frantically. Kira grabbed him from behind, wrapping her left arm across his chest in a standard rescue hold. Tommy continued to thrash. Kira began swimming perpendicular to the rip current, the proper technique to escape its pull. She used a side stroke with her right arm while holding Tommy with her left. Tommy's continued thrashing created erratic vibrations and splashing at the surface. They were now 70 yards from shore in water approximately 15 feet deep. The bull shark, cruising at 12 feet depth about 40 yards away, detected the irregular vibrations. The shark altered course and began swimming toward the disturbance, rising to 8 feet depth. The shark accelerated rapidly. David had spotted them from the beach and was running toward the lifeguard tower, shouting and waving his arms. The lifeguard finally noticed the emergency, grabbed his rescue buoy, and began running toward the water. Minutes later, when Kira and Tommy were approximately 55 yards from shore, the bull shark attacked. The shark approached from behind and below, rising rapidly. Its jaws opened wide, revealing rows of triangular teeth. The shark struck Kira's lower body in one devastating bite, its jaws clamping onto her right leg and hip area. The teeth penetrated deep into muscle tissue, causing severe deep tissue damage and massive trauma to major blood vessels in her upper leg and pelvis. The force pulled Kira underwater, but she maintained her grip on Tommy. Underwater, Kira instinctively struck the shark's snout and eye area. The shark released its grip after several seconds. Kira surfaced, gasping, still holding Tommy. Blood poured from the catastrophic wound on her right leg and hip. The pain was overwhelming, but her training and adrenaline kept her focused. She began swimming again toward shore with her right arm, kicking weakly with her left leg. Her right leg was nearly useless. As Kira struggled toward shore, the shark made brief secondary contact, bumping her torso and causing additional shallow lacerations before disengaging. The impact caused Kira to lose her grip on Tommy, who floated away on his inflatable floaties. Blood loss was accelerating rapidly. Kira's strength faded as shock overwhelmed her system. She struggled to stay at the surface, her movements becoming weaker. The lifeguard reached Tommy within minutes. Tommy was screaming and pointing at the water where Kira was struggling. The lifeguard grabbed Tommy and placed him on the rescue buoy, then began swimming him back to shore. He radioed for help. 2 other lifeguards entered the water with rescue boards. Tommy was brought to shore shortly after, physically uninjured, but traumatized. Kira's body, kept buoyant by the salt water and her remaining air in her lungs, surfaced shortly afterward, approximately 45 yards from shore, floating face down. The two lifeguards reached her within 30 seconds and pulled her onto one of the boards. They paddled rapidly to shore. Paramedics immediately began emergency treatment. Kira was unconscious and not breathing. She had no pulse. Her right leg and hip area had a massive bite wound with severe deep tissue damage, crushed muscle, and major vascular injury. Her torso showed additional shallow lacerations from the secondary contact. Blood loss was catastrophic. Paramedics worked frantically to stabilize her, but her injuries were too severe. An emergency helicopter was initially requested, but canceled after assessment, revealed she was in traumatic cardiac arrest with massive blood loss. Kira was transported by ground ambulance to a nearby medical center. Kira was pronounced dead in the emergency room where she had worked as a nurse for 7 years. The medical examiner documented massive trauma from a shark attack. The primary bite caused catastrophic damage to her right leg and hip, including major blood vessel rupture. The secondary contact caused additional trauma to her torso. The cause of death was exsanguination and hemorrhagic shock from the severe injuries sustained. Bite measurements indicated a bull shark between 8 and 10 feet in length. Tommy Patterson survived without physical injury. The beach was closed for 48 hours. Kira was posthumously recognized for her heroic actions in saving the young boy's life at the cost of her own. It was July 22, 2020 at Tiger Beach, Bahamas, a shallow sand flat off the western edge of Grand Bahama Island and one of the most well-known shark diving locations on the planet. The bottom sits at roughly 6 to 8 meters, a pale expanse of sand stretching in every direction with almost nowhere to hide. The water is warm, clear, and deceptively calm. On any given dive day, multiple tiger sharks move through in slow, overlapping circuits, drawn by bait crates placed by operators running structured encounters. It looks controlled, but the animals are not captive or trained. They are full-sized apex predators choosing to be there. Victor Hale, 41, was a real estate broker and recreational diver with fewer than 40 logged dives, most on controlled reef sites. He had no experience with large predator encounters. Tiger Beach was a significant step up, but the operation's safety reputation gave him enough confidence to book. The briefing was thorough. Stay low to the sand. Maintain eye contact with approaching sharks. Do not turn your back. Do not drift from the group. Guides carried metal redirect poles to manage shark spacing. The system worked, but only if every diver maintained discipline. During an earlier dive, Victor showed signs of difficulty. He struggled with neutral buoyancy, drifting upward repeatedly, and turned his back on approaching sharks more than once. The issues were noted, but not enough to pull him from the water. Tiger sharks are among the most deliberate predators in any ocean. They do not rush or chase. They close distance in slow, steady passes, reading the environment with patience that makes them far more dangerous than faster species. Their jaws are wide, their teeth designed to shear through bone, and a single investigative bite can inflict unsurvivable damage. They are not aggressive by default, but they do not tolerate vulnerability. A target that breaks eye contact, moves erratically, or separates from a group triggers a shift from curiosity to commitment. The group descended and formed a loose semicircle around the bait crates. Guides actively managed spacing with poles. The system was functioning. Victor started in position, but gradually lost buoyancy control. Overinflation of his BCD combined with inconsistent breathing lifted him several meters above the group. He drifted behind the formation. Simultaneously, two sharks approached on intersecting paths, pulling the nearest guide's attention as they redirected both animals. Victor was within general view, but outside immediate reach. From his elevated position, his silhouette became sharply defined against the bright surface. He was no longer part of the group's visual mass. Isolated, elevated, and backlit. A large tiger shark approached from below at a low angle, partially obscured by glare. The approach was steady, not a charge. Victor registered the shark only at close range. He turned abruptly and kicked, creating sudden erratic movement that broke eye contact and exposed his lower body at a vulnerable angle. The shark had already closed to investigative distance. Victor's reaction did not deter it. The turn presented his lower torso and upper thigh directly in the shark's path. It delivered a single bite. The jaws closed across the junction of his lower torso and upper leg with enormous force, severing the femoral artery and inflicting catastrophic internal trauma. The impact spun Victor as the shark released immediately and veered off, circling at short distance, but not re-engaging. Blood spread rapidly. Victor lost buoyancy control and drifted upward, unresponsive. Guides reacted within seconds, intercepting nearby sharks with poles before reaching him. He was secured and rushed toward the surface. Consciousness was lost during the ascent. The hemorrhage was too severe. He died from catastrophic blood loss caused by a single bite, delivered after drifting out of formation and losing the one thing keeping him alive: eye contact with the predator below. The incident prompted review of diver screening protocols and whether experience minimums should be enforced at high-risk sites. The community debated accessibility versus safety at locations like Tiger Beach. Victor Hale drifted out of position and lost sight of the shark already watching him. For Tana Brock, the threat didn't come from losing sight of the animal. It came from a single piece of hardware that everyone assumed was locked. August 14, 2013, brought perfect conditions to Jupiter Inlet, Florida. Morning sun sparkled on emerald Atlantic waters as gentle swells created ideal visibility for the annual South Florida spearfishing tournament. Alex Paul, 33, couldn't have asked for better conditions for one of the region's most prestigious underwater hunting competitions. Alex embodied the passionate dedication of Florida's spearfishing community. The construction foreman from Miami spent weekends freediving in crystal-clear waters, honing breath-holding abilities and perfecting aim with spear guns. Though not professional, his natural athleticism and years of experience earned respect among the tight-knit fraternity. That morning, Alex joined 40 competitors at the tournament briefing. Target species included cobia, kingfish, and grouper, prized game fish commanding high point values. Alex had scouted extensively and identified promising spots where large fish were likely found. Competition began at sunrise, with boats spreading across the designated area. Alex and dive buddy Carlos headed to a productive reef in 30 feet of water where baitfish schools attracted larger predatory species. Water was exceptionally clear with 80-foot visibility, perfect for spotting and stalking quarries. For 2 hours, Alex had moderate success with smaller fish contributing to his score. But as the morning progressed, he became focused on finding a trophy fish for top prizes. When he spotted a massive cobia cruising the reef edge, Alex knew he'd found his target. The cobia was magnificent, easily 50 pounds and worth maximum tournament points. Alex hyperventilated to extend bottom time, then dove to intercept the fish's path. His shot was perfect, striking just behind the gills, but the wounded fish immediately took off for deeper water. In excitement over such a prize specimen, Alex became separated from Carlos and other divers, finding himself alone in an isolated reef section. The wounded cobia's struggle created a significant blood trail as Alex fought to control the powerful fish. When Alex finally surfaced with his prize, he was bleeding from cuts caused by sharp fins and exhausted from the underwater battle. The combination of fish blood and human blood, along with continued struggles of the dying cobia, created perfect stimuli triggering predatory instincts of every shark in the vicinity. What Alex didn't realize was that he had attracted one of Florida's most dangerous predators. Bull sharks are perfectly adapted to the state's warm coastal waters, possessing remarkable adaptation that allows them to survive in both saltwater and freshwater. These powerful hunters typically reach 6 to 8 feet and have specialized kidneys that regulate salt content in their blood, enabling them to appear anywhere from open ocean to golf course ponds miles inland. Their incredible sensory system allows them to detect vibrations from struggling fish hundreds of yards away and sense electrical fields from several meters distance. Unlike other shark species that may be more cautious around humans, bull sharks are known for their bold, direct approach to potential food sources, often competing directly with spearfishermen for their catch. Their aggressive nature and opportunistic feeding behavior, combined with their ability to strike repeatedly rather than bite once and retreat, makes them one of the most feared predators in American waters. The 7-foot bull shark had been patrolling the reef when blood scent reached its nostrils from hundreds of yards away. The predator's acute senses detected electrical fields generated by both the struggling fish and Alex's rapidly beating heart. Alex saw the shark approaching and tried releasing his catch, hoping to distract the predator with wounded cobia. But bull sharks are opportunistic feeders with insatiable appetite, and multiple potential prey items only intensified aggressive behavior. Instead of taking the offered fish, the bull shark struck directly at Alex, massive jaws clamping down on his leg with crushing force. The attack was swift and brutal. The bite severed major blood vessels, and the predator's characteristic multiple strikes caused massive tissue damage. Alex fought desperately, punching at the shark's snout while trying to reach his dive knife. But the bull shark's aggressive nature meant continued assault with relentless determination, striking again and again until water turned crimson. Other tournament divers, alerted by commotion and spreading blood slick, raced toward Alex's location. They found him floating unconsciously, spear gun and wounded cobia drifting nearby. The bull shark had vanished, leaving only devastating evidence of its attack. Despite immediate first aid and Coast Guard helicopter evacuation, Alex died from massive blood loss during the 40-minute flight to trauma center. The tournament was canceled, and the spearfishing community mourned one of their most respected members. Alex's death led to enhanced safety protocols in tournaments. New requirements mandated closer proximity to dive buddies, and organizers began providing emergency response training. The association established a memorial fund promoting safer diving practices. It was August 14th, 2018, and the calm waters of Monterey Bay stretched endlessly toward the horizon, their surface barely disturbed by the gentle morning breeze. California's central coast had awakened to perfect conditions for spearfishing, with crystal-clear visibility extending down through the kelp forests. Gwen Palmer had been planning this expedition for months, viewing it as the perfect opportunity to bond with her 16-year-old son Tyler, while pursuing her passion for underwater hunting. The 42-year-old marine biology teacher possessed 3 years of spearfishing experience, though most of her previous dives had occurred in shallow, protected areas rarely exceeding 30 feet. Palmer's recent divorce had motivated her to seek new adventures and create lasting memories with Tyler. Palmer's overconfidence stemmed largely from her academic background, rather than practical, deep-water experience. Her extensive theoretical knowledge had created a dangerous sense of security that overshadowed the inherent risks of spearfishing in apex predator territory. She had chosen the Monterey Bay location specifically because of its reputation for large fish populations, dismissing warnings about the area's proximity to seal colonies and great white sharks. Tyler had agreed to document their expedition using an extending pole camera system from a safer depth of 30 feet. The morning began with Palmer's descent to 60 feet, significantly deeper than her previous comfort zone, as she searched for large lingcod near the kelp forest edge. Her enthusiasm for impressing Tyler and proving her expertise overrode the conservative approach that had kept her safe during previous outings. Tyler remained at 30 feet, filming his mother's descent while maintaining a safer distance from the deeper hunting grounds. Great white sharks represent the ocean's most formidable apex predators, with adults commonly reaching 14 to 16 feet in length and weighing between 2,000 to 3,000 pounds. These hunters possess extraordinary sensory capabilities, detecting bioelectrical signals and responding to low-frequency vibrations. Their powerful jaws contain multiple rows of serrated teeth designed to deliver devastating bite forces. Monterey Bay's ecosystem attracts great whites throughout the year, particularly during late summer when seal populations concentrate near offshore rookeries. These predators patrol the kelp forest edges where seals venture to feed, and they respond aggressively to the distress signals of wounded fish. Palmer successfully speared a 25-pound lingcod at approximately 7:30 a.m., securing the struggling fish to her float line as she began her ascent through the kelp canopy. The wounded fish's violent thrashing and blood trail created an irresistible attraction for a 14-foot great white that had been patrolling the area. Palmer's mask-mounted camera recorded her satisfaction with the catch, while Tyler documented her ascent from his position above. The massive predator approached through the kelp forest with calculated precision, its dark silhouette barely visible against the underwater landscape. Palmer remained focused on managing her catch and navigating through the dense kelp fronds, unaware that she had entered the final moments of a predatory sequence targeting her speared fish. The shark's attack came with devastating suddenness, its powerful jaws targeting the struggling lingcod with laser precision. Palmer's left thigh was caught incidentally in the strike, as the massive predator seized the fish she held close to her body. The impact drove Palmer sideways through the water as the shark's teeth penetrated through her wetsuit and deep into the muscle of her upper leg, severing the femoral artery in a catastrophic vascular injury. Palmer's mask-mounted camera recorded sudden violent motion and loss of visual clarity during the 2-second strike. The predator's feeding behavior had been triggered by the combination of blood, struggling prey, and Palmer's proximity to the food source. After securing the lingcod, the shark disengaged and disappeared into the kelp forest, leaving Palmer with life-threatening arterial damage. Tyler witnessed his mother's explosive return to the surface, her screams carrying clearly across the calm water as bright red blood poured from the deep puncture wounds in her leg. He immediately threw a rescue line and began hauling Palmer toward the boat, while attempting to apply emergency protocols he had learned in his lifeguard training. Palmer remained conscious during the rescue, understanding the severity of her injuries even as shock began setting in. Tyler attempted to apply a tourniquet using a dive weight belt, but the high location of the femoral artery damage and the compression from Palmer's wetsuit made effective pressure application nearly impossible. The severed artery continued pumping blood at an alarming rate, despite his desperate efforts. Palmer's blood pressure dropped rapidly as her circulatory system failed to compensate for the arterial hemorrhaging. She lost consciousness during the frantic boat ride back to harbor, her body unable to maintain vital organ function despite Tyler's continued pressure on the wound. California wildlife authorities launched a comprehensive investigation into the incident, examining shark activity patterns and safety protocols for spearfishing in known predator habitats. The footage from both cameras was secured by authorities and never released to the public, respecting the family's privacy. Palmer's family emphasized her passion for marine education and her dedication to sharing ocean knowledge with her students. Local spearfishing communities implemented enhanced safety protocols, including mandatory buddy systems at depth and improved emergency response procedures. It was October 3, 2015, when the vast expanse of open ocean stretched in every direction off the north shore of Oahu, Hawaii. The water shimmered under the mid-morning sun, its surface relatively calm with gentle swells rolling beneath cloudless skies. Miles from the protective embrace of coral reefs, this deep blue water represented a different world entirely from coastal zones, where most recreational swimmers ventured. Seabirds circled lazily far beyond the reef line, their presence indicating schools of baitfish or recent feeding activity. Evidence of chumming from earlier fishing vessels lingered in the area, organic material drifting through the water column and attracting various marine species. Boat traffic remained minimal this far offshore, with only occasional charter vessels visible on the distant horizon. Gage Pender, a 41-year-old private charter fisherman, had launched his solo spearfishing expedition during what appeared to be ideal conditions. The experienced blue water spearfisher had spent years hunting pelagic fish in offshore waters, growing accustomed to the isolation and self-reliance required for such ventures. Unlike coastal spearfishing where assistance remained readily available, Gage operated miles from shore without a nearby support vessel. Oceanic white-tip sharks rank among the most dangerous predators in open ocean environments, their reputation built on aggressive behavior and persistence when encountering potential food sources. These sharks typically measure 8 to 11 feet in length, their bodies designed for patrolling vast stretches of open water far from coastal structures. The species gets its name from distinctive white-tipped dorsal and pectoral fins that contrast sharply against bronze-gray bodies. Unlike reef sharks that maintain territories near coral structures, oceanic whitetips roam the pelagic zone where food sources appear unpredictably and opportunities must be seized immediately. This scarcity drives their boldness, making them far more willing to investigate unfamiliar objects. The oceanic whitetip possesses triangular, serrated teeth in the upper jaw designed for cutting and tearing, while the lower jaw contains narrower teeth for gripping. They demonstrate particular attraction to struggling fish, blood in the water, and vibrations created by spearfishing activities. Gage floated at the surface, focused on securing a freshly speared fish to his float line. The fish's struggles and blood released into the water created exactly the stimulus that draws oceanic whitetips from considerable distances. An oceanic whitetip approached directly, emerging from deeper water with purpose, immediately beginning to circle in tightening loops around Gage's position. The shark's behavior indicated high interest rather than simple curiosity. It made multiple passes, each orbit bringing it closer to both the speared fish and the human handling it. This represented a critical moment where abandoning the catch might have prevented tragedy, but his experience may have led him to underestimate the threat. The attack began with a testing strike. The oceanic whitetip lunged forward, its jaws closing on Gage's left forearm with crushing force. The serrated teeth punctured through skin and muscle, severing tendons and creating deep lacerations. Blood immediately bloomed into the surrounding water, transforming investigation into feeding behavior. As Gage instinctively pulled back, the float line tangled around his leg, the equipment meant to secure his catch now becoming a deadly impediment. The restriction prevented effective swimming or powerful kicks necessary to escape. His movements became limited and inefficient, his injured arm hampering any coordinated attempt to free himself. The oceanic whitetip circled and returned, emboldened by the blood dispersing through the water and the struggling movements that mimicked wounded prey. The shark delivered a devastating bite to Gage's right thigh, its teeth driving deep into the femoral region and severing the major artery. The massive blood vessel ruptured, releasing a catastrophic volume of blood and accelerating the feeding response. The combination of arterial bleeding and the entangling float line created a horrifying trap. Gage's ability to surface and breathe became compromised as blood loss rapidly induced shock. The water around him darkened, each heartbeat pumping more life from his body into the indifferent ocean. The shark made multiple additional passes, its persistence typical of oceanic white-tip behavior, when blood saturates the immediate environment. A strike to the torso caused further catastrophic damage, the shark's teeth tearing through intercostal muscles. The progression from exploratory bite to full predation had taken only minutes. Severe injuries to both limbs and torso prevented any possibility of self-rescue. The femoral artery damage alone meant that even immediate help could not have arrived in time. He died from combined trauma and exsanguination before assistance could reach his location miles from shore. The incident prompted discussions within the Hawaiian spearfishing community about solo offshore operations and the dangers posed by oceanic white-tip sharks. It was June 14, 2016, off the coast of Gansby, South Africa, a stretch of ocean so dense with great whites that locals call it Shark Alley. The water was dark, cold, and churning under overcast skies, with visibility dropping to just a few meters. This was the kind of place where you feel predators before you see them, where movement beneath the surface always meant something was watching, circling just out of sight below them. The Moore family had traveled here for what was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime. Gary Moore, 52, was a mechanical contractor, a man who understood how systems fail. His wife Glenda, 50, a school administrator, was more cautious but trusted the professionals. Their son Leo, 27, was a fitness trainer and thrill seeker with an action camera strapped to his chest, while their daughter Lisa, 24, worked in hospitality and had the least experience in open water. What they booked wasn't a regulated dive, but an off-record, experimental cage experience, marketed as private and unrestricted. The cage had been modified for visibility, with reduced bar spacing near the top hatch and a simplified latch system that removed redundant locking points. It promised a closer encounter, but quietly removed the safety layers standard operations relied on, increasing exposure with every design compromise made. Before entering, Gary questioned the latch system. The crew demonstrated it quickly, insisting it was secure. What they didn't disclose was that the latch had already failed to seat properly earlier and had only been forced into position instead of repaired, leaving a hidden point of failure under stress. Great white sharks are apex predators capable of explosive vertical acceleration and immense bite force. In breach scenarios, they don't hesitate. They commit fully, driven by speed, instinct, and precise targeting. The family entered the cage as waves splashed over the top hatch. Unlike regulated dives, bait lines were deployed aggressively and far closer than recommended, drawing multiple sharks into tight competing movements around the cage, increasing unpredictability with each pass beneath them. Then it happened. A large great white surged upward toward bait being pulled too close to the surface. It accelerated from below in a full breach attempt. The shark's snout and upper body slammed into the hatch with violent upward force. The latch failed instantly, and the hatch blew open. For a split second, the shark's head forced into the opening, and then its jaws reacted. Gary was directly beneath it. The bite wasn't exploratory, it was reflexive and full. The jaws closed across his upper torso inside the cage, crushing inward before releasing as the shark lost momentum and slipped back into the water. The damage was immediate and catastrophic. The cage erupted into chaos as water surged in and the structure rocked violently. Bodies collided against steel bars, and orientation was lost almost instantly in the confined space, leaving no clear sense of direction or control. Panic broke whatever control remained. Leo forced his way upward through the open hatch, pulling himself into open water. Lisa followed seconds behind, scrambling out after him as staying inside felt more dangerous than outside. Inside, Glenda was thrown sideways, her leg wedged beneath a lower crossbar as the cage tilted. She struggled to free herself, but each movement was countered by shifting weight and incoming water. Outside the cage, the situation deteriorated even faster. Leo surfaced disoriented, blood trailing from his head after striking the frame. The disturbance redirected attention. A second great white approached from below, striking upward and pulling him under before he could react. Lisa tried to swim toward the boat, but the water around her had already become an active feeding zone. Another shark moved in from behind. The strike came laterally, knocking her off the surface and pulling her under in seconds. Inside the cage, Glenda remained trapped as water surged repeatedly through the open hatch. Each wave forced her lower. She inhaled water before anyone could reach her, her strength fading rapidly with each passing second. The shark that breached had already withdrawn. No prolonged entry, only impact, a single bite, and disappearance. Crew engaged the winch within seconds. Gary showed no signs of survivable life. Glenda was unresponsive upon extraction. Leo and Lisa were not recovered in time to be saved. The investigation exposed what had been hidden beneath the promise of exclusivity: unregulated modifications, ignored mechanical faults, and unsafe baiting practices that removed any margin for error. Gary, Glenda, Leo, and Lisa Moore entered the water trusting a system designed to separate them from one of the ocean's most efficient predators. Instead, that system failed, and in seconds, the barrier between protection and exposure vanished completely, leaving them exposed. The morning of November 11th, 2017 found the Central Pacific exactly as it had been for days. Flat, relentless blue in every direction, the horizon unbroken, the water below the vessel shifting from turquoise to a deep, lightless navy the further from shore you went. It was the kind of ocean that looked peaceful from the deck of a boat. From the water, it looked like something else entirely. Hannah Brooks had been at sea for 4 days when she decided to get in. Hannah was 29, a travel content creator from Sydney whose channel had grown steadily over 3 years on the back of one simple promise. She would go where other creators wouldn't. No safety nets, no staged moments, no comfortable distance between herself and the world she was filming. Her audience loved her for it. They loved the unfiltered quality of her content, the sense that they were seeing something real. Hannah loved it too. She loved the feeling of being exactly at the edge of something, and she had built a career out of finding that edge and stepping toward it. That instinct had served her well across 3 years of travel content. Remote jungle treks, overnight stays in places with no infrastructure, open water swims in locations that made her followers' palms sweat just watching. She had never been seriously hurt. She had come to think of that as evidence that her judgment was sound, that her instincts were reliable, that the line she kept approaching was one she understood. The vessel was crossing a remote stretch of the Pacific when she had the idea. The conditions were perfect: calm surface, good light, the kind of deep blue open ocean that photographs like a dream. She convinced the crew to stop. Just a few minutes in the water, she told them, a swim segment. The crew was hesitant. This was deep, isolated ocean, far from any coastline, the kind of water that oceanic white-tip sharks treat as their private territory. But Hannah was persuasive, and the conditions looked benign, and eventually they agreed. She entered the water with her camera. For the first few minutes, everything was exactly what she had imagined. The ocean stretched in every direction, vast and blue and silent. Then, quietly, the small fish that had been visible near the surface disappeared. The water below her seemed to empty out in a way that had no obvious explanation. Hannah didn't stop filming. The first shark appeared at distance, a slow, wide circle, its movements unhurried and deliberate. Hannah kept the camera rolling. A second shape appeared further out, less engaged but present. She kept filming. What she didn't recognize, or didn't allow herself to recognize, was that the first shark's circles were getting smaller. Each pass brought it incrementally closer, the behavior shifting from curiosity into something that marine biologists would later describe as active investigation. The escalation was gradual enough to rationalize at every individual step, and Hannah rationalized every one of them. The shark came from behind and below, a single exploratory bite to her leg, the kind of contact researchers call investigative. It pulled away. For a fraction of a second, there was stillness. Then, Hannah reacted. The rapid movement, the splashing, the sudden disruption at the surface. It changed everything instantly. Blood entered the water. On the boat, the crew was already shouting, someone throwing a line, another scrambling for the ladder. The water between the vessel and Hannah was no longer a place anyone could safely enter. The first shark turned back, faster now, the earlier deliberateness gone. The second shark began closing in, drawn by the disturbance, its movements less measured than the first. What followed was faster and more disorganized than anything the earlier circling had suggested. The primary shark came back hard. There was contact, chaos at the surface, the crew screaming from the deck. A line hit the water near Hannah, but the distance was wrong, the angle was wrong, and the situation was escalating faster than any of it could be corrected. The second shark was close now, circling the disturbance, occasionally lunging toward the surface. Hannah Brooks sustained fatal injuries in the water before she could be brought back aboard. November 8, 2017, brought crisp autumn conditions to Fort Ross, Northern California. Morning fog lifted to reveal dramatic rocky coastline where Pacific swells crashed against ancient sea stacks. Ryan Walsh, 29, couldn't have asked for better diving weather. Calm seas and good visibility promised a profitable day, harvesting the prized mollusks that commanded premium prices in the finest restaurants. Ryan embodied the dangerous profession of commercial abalone diving. His weathered hands and sun-damaged face told the story of 6 years spent in frigid Pacific waters, freediving to depths that would terrify recreational divers. Friends described him as methodical and safety-conscious, but also driven by an obsessive pursuit of the perfect abalone beds hidden in rocky depths. That morning, Ryan launched his small boat with dive partner Marcus, a younger diver who looked up to Ryan as a mentor. The two had worked together for 3 seasons, developing wordless communication that comes from shared danger in one of California's most hazardous occupations. Ryan chose a productive rocky reef in 25 feet of water. The location was challenging. Strong currents, kelp forests, and ever-present danger of entanglement in abandoned fishing nets littering the bottom. As Ryan suited up in his thick wetsuit, he felt the familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension. The water temperature was a bone-chilling 55 degrees, but Ryan had built tolerance over years of exposure. His dive bag contained an abalone iron, measuring gauge, and collection bag, tools of his dangerous trade. The first few dives went perfectly. Ryan descended through kelp canopy to rocky bottom, where clusters of red abalone clung like living jewels. His experienced eye identified legal specimens, and practiced hands pried them loose with surgical precision. But on his 7th dive, disaster struck. Working to free a particularly large abalone, Ryan's fin became entangled in abandoned fishing nets. The nearly invisible monofilament wrapped around his leg like a spider's web, holding him against the rocky bottom as his air supply ran dangerously low. After desperate struggle, Ryan managed to cut through enough netting to break free. He made an emergency ascent, lungs burning as he fought through kelp toward sunlight. When he finally surfaced, he was exhausted, disoriented, and dangerously far from his boat. What Ryan didn't realize was that his distressed movements had attracted the attention of California's apex predator. Great whites are living fossils that have patrolled these waters for millions of years, perfectly adapted to hunt in the kelp forests where seals and sea lions congregate. These massive sharks typically reach 12 to 16 feet and can weigh over 3,000 pounds. Their torpedo-shaped bodies capable of explosive bursts exceeding 35 miles per hour that launch them completely from water. Their incredible sensory system allows them to detect electrical fields from several meters away and track blood trails from 500 yards distance. During autumn, mature great whites patrol Northern California in greater numbers, following migration patterns of their preferred prey. These sharks are incredibly intelligent, capable of learning and adapting hunting strategies, making them unpredictable and extremely dangerous to humans who venture into their territory. Marcus, watching from 300 yards away, immediately recognized something was wrong. Ryan floated motionless at the surface, clearly in distress. Marcus started the engine and raced toward his partner, but the distance seemed impossibly far. The 13-foot great white had been patrolling kelp beds when it detected Ryan's emergency ascent. The shark's acute senses picked up electrical impulses from his rapidly beating heart, scent of abalone in his collection bag, and erratic movements of a creature in distress, all triggers activating predatory instincts. Ryan never saw the attack coming. The great white struck from below with devastating force, massive jaws clamping down on his torso with bite force reaching 4,000 pounds per square inch, slicing through wetsuit into vital organs. The shark's initial bite was exploratory, typical great white behavior with unfamiliar prey, but damage was already catastrophic. The predator released Ryan and circled back, following the blood trail as Ryan struggled to stay afloat. His thick wetsuit provided some protection, but the shark's teeth had penetrated deep enough to cause massive internal bleeding. Ryan's screams echoed across water as he fought to reach his partner, but strength rapidly faded from blood loss. Marcus reached Ryan within minutes, pulling his bloodied partner from water with desperate strength. Ryan was conscious but fading fast, wetsuit torn and bloody. Marcus radioed for emergency assistance while applying pressure to wounds, but they were miles from help. Despite heroic first aid efforts, Ryan died from massive blood loss 20 minutes after the attack. The Coast Guard helicopter arrived 45 minutes later, but far too late. Ryan's death sent shockwaves through California's small abalone diving community. The state implemented new safety regulations, and Marcus became a dive safety instructor. The beds at Fort Ross were temporarily closed, while biologists studied great white activity. It was September 22, 2018, and the murky waters of Manila Harbor held secrets beneath their oily surface. A minor fuel spill 2 days earlier had left a sheen of debris floating near the river mouth where the Pasig emptied into the bay, and now a dozen volunteers waded through the contaminated shallows, hauling plastic bottles and soaked cardboard toward waiting collection boats. None of them knew that the same polluted conditions that drew them there had also attracted one of the ocean's most adaptable predators, a bull shark that had followed the scent of organic waste and blood from fish processing plants upstream. Ronald Pabico was a 45-year-old warehouse loader from the Tondo district, a man whose calloused hands told the story of 20 years moving cargo along Manila's waterfront. His neighbors knew him as dependable but quiet, the kind of man who showed up early for work and never complained about double shifts during the busy season. He had joined the cleanup effort through a parish church, where his wife served as a lector. Ronald rarely participated in church activities, but the priest had made a special announcement about needing volunteers, and his wife said that something about the direct plea had moved him to raise his hand. That Saturday morning, Ronald had taken a jeepney to the harbor with 3 other parishioners, arriving at the staging area where organizers from a local environmental group distributed gloves and mesh bags. He signed the volunteer roster in careful block letters, and listened to a brief safety talk that focused mainly on avoiding sharp objects, wearing gloves, and not drinking the water. The coordinator mentioned that the outer harbor was generally safe for wading, though the water quality was poor. Volunteers were given no warning about sharks, which are occasionally present in shallow harbor waters, especially after heavy runoff. The group had also not secured a formal permit from harbor authorities, and no rescue plan or first aid measures for marine predator encounters was discussed. The harbor's outer edges, where container ships waited for berth assignments, created a brackish mixing zone between river runoff and seawater. This transitional environment was plausible territory for bull sharks, which can tolerate both fresh and salt water. These predators grow up to about 11 feet long and 500 pounds, and have a very powerful bite. Estimates vary by study. Unlike most sharks that avoid murky water, bull sharks have evolved to hunt in near-zero visibility, using electroreception to detect the muscle contractions of prey from yards away. The volunteers worked in a loose line, moving parallel to a rusty cargo barge anchored about 60 feet from shore. The water reached their waists, the bottom soft with decades of accumulated silt. Ronald worked methodically, bending to grab floating trash and stuffing it into his mesh bag. The barge crew, 4 men taking a cigarette break on deck, watched the volunteers with mild interest. One of them later told investigators he had noticed something large moving beneath the surface but had assumed it was debris caught in the current. The spill itself had created conditions that reduced visibility to less than a foot. The splashing of volunteers mimicked the erratic movements of injured fish. Blood and organic waste from the river mouth had drawn the shark into the harbor days earlier, and it had remained, feeding on the abundant prey the polluted water concealed. Bull sharks may exhibit bold behavior in confined, shallow spaces where escape is limited, increasing the chance of opportunistic attacks. Ronald had moved slightly ahead of the other volunteers, reaching for a cluster of plastic bags tangled in floating wood. He pulled the bags free and turned back toward the collection boat. The cargo barge crew saw the water erupt before anyone heard the sound. The bull shark struck from directly below with devastating force, its blunt snout slamming into Ronald's upper thighs and lower torso before its jaws clamped shut. The shark performed a thrashing motion, which teeth-equipped sharks use to tear pieces from large prey. The water around the collection site quickly clouded with blood and debris. The other volunteers began screaming and thrashing toward the collection boat and shore ladders. One woman vomited into the water. A young man later told police he saw Ronald's legs severely damaged and drifting separately, while his torso was heavily injured but partially submerged. According to witnesses, everything happened in an instant. On the barge, a deckhand grabbed the radio and called harbor authorities, shouting that someone had been attacked in the water. A harbor patrol vessel, stationed 3/4 of a mile away at Pier 15, arrived 12 minutes after the call, consistent with a patrol that happened to be nearby. Recovery divers arrived within an hour and located Ronald's remains separated by current flow over several sections, consistent with severe trauma from a bull shark, but not the immediate waist-level dismemberment that is extremely uncommon. Tooth fragments recovered at the scene were consistent with a large bull shark, roughly 9 to 10 feet long. The cleanup operation was immediately suspended. Authorities issued a temporary swimming and wading ban for the outer harbor zone, though enforcement was minimal. Local media coverage was brief and understated, with officials emphasizing the rarity of such incidents. The environmental group that organized the cleanup quietly disbanded 3 months later. The church held a memorial mass, but Ronald's widow declined to speak publicly. The shark was never located. It was May 22nd, 2017, when the morning sun broke across the crystalline waters surrounding Tavuni Island in Fiji's remote outer reef system. The ocean stretched endlessly in shades of turquoise and deep blue, its surface calm and inviting under cloudless tropical skies. Below the waterline, the reef wall dropped vertically into an abyss, plunging hundreds of feet into darkness where subsurface currents moved with invisible power. The dive boat rocked gently at its mooring, positioned precisely above one of the island's most celebrated wall dive sites, known for encounters with large marine life. Earlier that morning, the dive briefing had emphasized the presence of strong down currents along the wall's edge and recent sightings of tiger sharks in the area. Large sea turtles had been observed gliding near the reef face just hours before, their movements slow and deliberate as they fed on sponges and soft corals. Libby Krause, a 27-year-old environmental science graduate student, had traveled to Fiji specifically for this dive. The certified advanced open water diver approached underwater exploration with methodical precision, always adhering strictly to dive protocols and depth limits. Her partner, a 29-year-old freelance photographer, had opted to remain aboard the boat organizing camera equipment, while Libby joined the scheduled guided descent along the reef wall. Tiger sharks represent one of the ocean's most formidable apex predators, second only to great whites in documented attacks on humans. These massive hunters commonly reach lengths of 10 to 14 feet and can exceed 1,500 pounds, their distinctive dark stripes fading with age as their bodies grow more uniform in color. Tiger sharks possess uniquely serrated teeth with deep notches, designed specifically for cutting through tough materials, including sea turtle shells, marine mammal bones, and thick fish flesh. Unlike more selective feeders, tiger sharks demonstrate indiscriminate eating habits, consuming virtually anything they encounter, from carrion to living prey. They patrol reef edges and drop-offs where deep water meets shallow structures, often rising from depths to investigate movement near the surface or along vertical walls. Their slow, methodical approach to hunting allows them to conserve energy while maintaining constant surveillance of their territory. Libby descended along the vertical reef wall, her depth gauge reading approximately 22 meters, as she drifted slightly away from the dive guide. The planned depth for this dive was shallower still, but the wall's mesmerizing formations and the gentle pull of subsurface currents had drawn her deeper than intended. This deviation from the established dive plan would prove immediately fatal. A tiger shark materialized from the blue water to her left, its massive form gliding parallel to the reef wall with deceptive ease. It passed once, close enough that Libby should have registered its silhouette against the open water, then swept wide in a broad arc behind her. The pass was unhurried, almost casual, a classic investigative circuit that tiger sharks use to assess unfamiliar stimuli before committing. For roughly 10 seconds, the shark was visible, then it vanished into the ambient blue, and Libby turned her attention back to the coral formations along the wall. It did not leave. The tiger shark came in again from behind and below, this time with unmistakable intent. The shark likely detected the minute electrical fields generated by her contracting muscles and beating heart, combined with the vibrations from her fin movements, signals that registered as potential prey along its established hunting corridor. On this second pass, the investigative phase ended. The attack came fast and without further warning. The tiger shark's jaws opened wide before clamping down on Libby's upper thigh with tremendous force. The serrated teeth sawed through the wetsuit material and tore deep into the quadriceps muscle, severing the femoral artery. Blood erupted into the surrounding water in thick clouds that obscured visibility immediately. The massive trauma triggered rapid physiological collapse. Pain and shock seized Libby's body as blood pressure began its steep decline. In her panic and agony, she gasped reflexively, her regulator torn from her mouth by her own convulsive movements. She fumbled for it once, her fingers closing on nothing but open water, and seawater flooded her airway as she inhaled. The aspiration compounded the hemorrhage, the two catastrophes feeding one another faster than her body could fight either. The compromised wetsuit integrity at the wound site disrupted her buoyancy control, but the expanding air in her BCD kept her from sinking uncontrollably. Instead, she hung suspended in the water column, consciousness flickering and fading as blood loss deepened. Shock and the salt water in her lungs starved her of oxygen. Within a minute, her movements had ceased entirely. The shark, having delivered its bite, moved away into the deeper water without returning. The dive guide reached her approximately 30 seconds later, drawn by the sudden cloud of blood that had bloomed across the wall. Libby showed no signs of life. Her eyes were open and vacant behind her mask, which had partially flooded. The guide immediately initiated an emergency ascent, inflating her BCD fully while controlling the rate of rise. They broke the surface less than 3 minutes after the attack. The boat crew pulled Libby's body aboard and began resuscitation efforts, but the combination of massive hemorrhage and saltwater aspiration had already proven fatal. Her heart had stopped beating before she left the depths. Local authorities conducted an investigation, noting the victim's deviation from planned depth parameters and the known presence of tiger sharks along that particular reef wall. The dive operator reinforced safety protocols and depth restrictions for future excursions. It was July 15, 2016, when the crystal-clear waters off Port Lincoln, South Australia, became the scene of a devastating tragedy. The Neptune Islands region, renowned for its thriving great white shark population, had drawn marine tourism operators for decades. The morning started with calm seas and excellent visibility, conditions that typically made maintenance work routine. Damon West, a 34-year-old certified diving instructor with 12 years of experience, had built his reputation on safety and precision. The former marine biologist turned adventure tourism guide was known throughout the industry for his methodical approach and calm demeanor under pressure. Recently divorced, West had thrown himself into his work, operating cage diving tours that brought tourists face-to-face with one of nature's most formidable predators. His expertise had made him a sought-after guide among international visitors seeking authentic shark encounters. On this particular morning, West was conducting routine maintenance on the cage system during a non-chumming period, accompanied by surface tender Liam Kelly, a 41-year-old deckhand known for his rule-focused approach. Operations coordinator Petra Stevens, 33, remained on deck, managing the tight schedule that kept their business profitable. The maintenance was critical. The cage hinge had malfunctioned twice that week, creating potential safety hazards for upcoming tours. The calm morning conditions seemed perfect for the quick repair work. Great white sharks are apex predators that can reach lengths of 20 feet and weights exceeding 5,000 pounds. These magnificent creatures patrol coastal waters with remarkable efficiency, using a combination of scent, low-frequency vibrations, and close-range electroreception. Their powerful jaws contain rows of serrated teeth, capable of delivering immense bite force, enough to crush bone and tear through dense tissue. During summer months, these predators actively hunt seals around the Neptune Islands, making the area both dangerous and fascinating. West descended to 35 feet wearing full diving gear. The routine inspection should have taken 8 minutes, but West's primary air regulator began free-flowing violently, creating a loud, alarming rush of escaping air. Following emergency protocols, he attempted to partially close the tank valve while switching to his backup regulator. However, The violent free flow combined with the sudden equipment failure triggered a moment of panic, causing West to begin an erratic, faster-than-normal ascent toward the surface. At 18 feet depth, the late afternoon sun created a low angle that cast West's struggling silhouette against the bright surface, the perfect illusion of an injured seal in distress. The erratic movement expelled air bubbles and vibration from his malfunctioning equipment, combined with his position in the known seal corridor where great whites actively hunted, triggered an investigative response from a 15-foot great white patrolling the area. The massive predator approached from below, its powerful tail propelling it upward with explosive force. The shark delivered one devastating bite to West's lower torso and upper thigh, its 3-inch teeth penetrating through the wetsuit and severing the femoral artery, along with major abdominal vessels. The encounter lasted only 3 to 4 seconds before the shark immediately disengaged upon recognizing West was not its intended prey. Despite the brief contact, the predator's razor-sharp teeth had caused catastrophic vascular damage. Massive arterial bleeding began immediately as West's life force poured into the surrounding water. The severed femoral artery alone could drain a human body within minutes, and the additional damage to abdominal vessels accelerated the blood loss to critical levels. West's body went into shock as his blood pressure plummeted rapidly. Surface tender Kelly attempted a rescue, quickly pulling West to the surface. West lost consciousness within 2 minutes due to massive blood loss and hypovolemic shock from the severed arteries. Death occurred from rapid exsanguination as his damaged circulatory system could no longer maintain vital organ function. Seawater aspiration during his final moments contributed to his demise, as West's weakened state prevented him from maintaining clear airways. The local marine tourism industry conducted internal safety audits following the incident, with operators examining equipment maintenance procedures and emergency response protocols. West's family released a statement emphasizing his passion for marine conservation and his dedication to safe diving practices. Industry operators implemented enhanced equipment inspection schedules and refined emergency ascent procedures for cage diving operations. The incident sparked internal debates about solo diving procedures and backup safety protocols in shark-populated waters. While West's death marked a devastating loss for the diving community, it would not be the last shark-related fatality to shock the region that year. The afternoon of August 9, 2013, was the kind of day that made the West African coast feel like the inside of a furnace. August is the peak of the wet season along that stretch of coastline. The air sits heavy and wet from the moment the sun comes up, and weeks of inland rain had been swelling the rivers, turning the water at the coast brown and opaque where the fresh water pushed out into the sea. The river mouths looked, that afternoon, like churned earth, murky, slow-moving, and completely unreadable from the surface. Victor Sands had walked past that river mouth every working day for 3 months. Victor was 51, a construction supervisor from Dakar who had spent 30 years doing hard, unglamorous work in conditions that most people in comfortable countries never think about. He was practical, experienced, and entirely uninterested in risk for its own sake. He managed crews, solved problems, and kept projects moving in places where the infrastructure made everything harder than it needed to be. He was not a man who sought out difficulty. He was a man who absorbed it quietly and kept going. The workers on his site had been cooling off in the river mouth for weeks, a routine that had developed organically in the absence of any alternative. Victor had joined them occasionally, wading in at the edges, never going far. What Victor didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the weeks of heavy rainfall had created conditions that were drawing bull sharks inshore. Bull sharks are unlike almost any other species in the water. They move freely between salt and fresh water. They are territorial and aggressive by nature, and they thrive in exactly the kind of low-visibility, brackish environment that the river mouth had become. They don't hunt by sight. They hunt by electroreception and vibration. They feel the pressure of a moving body through the water with a precision that has no human equivalent. The murk that made the river mouth look harmless was, for a bull shark, ideal. On the afternoon of August 9th, Victor entered the water alone. The other workers had already come and gone. He waded in deeper than he usually did. The heat had been particularly brutal that day, and the water offered immediate relief. He stood in water that reached his chest, in conditions he had no framework to evaluate as dangerous, in a river mouth that a bull shark had almost certainly been using as a feeding corridor. He never saw it coming. Nothing in the water gave any indication. No shape at the edge of visibility, no change in the current, no warning of any kind. The contact was instantaneous and total. There was no circling, No investigative pass, no escalation. Just an explosive strike from the murk with no preamble whatsoever. The force of it pulled him under. He resurfaced, and within seconds, not a structured pause, not a retreat, just seconds, the shark was on him again. Bull shark attacks in these conditions follow exactly this pattern. Explosive, rapid, with almost no interval between contacts. The water around Victor became violent in a way that the bystanders on the bank could hear before they could fully process what they were seeing. Victor Sands was incapacitated almost immediately. The injuries were not survivable. The people who ran toward the water's edge reached it within moments, but there was nothing to be done. His body was recovered downstream later that evening. Local authorities documented the attack and contacted regional wildlife officials, who confirmed that bull shark activity in river mouths along that stretch of coastline increased significantly during the wet season, a fact that was known to wildlife management, but had never been formally communicated to the construction crews working near the water. No warning signs had been posted. It was January 22, 2017, off the coast of Isla Guadalupe, Mexico, a volcanic island roughly 240 kilometers west of the Baja Peninsula, surrounded by some of the clearest water in the Pacific. Visibility here can exceed 30 meters on a good day, which is exactly why it became one of the most sought-after cage diving destinations in the world. But on this morning, conditions were different. A sediment plume from recent swells had reduced visibility to moderate levels. The water was darker than usual. Shapes below moved in and out of view without warning. Bevan Trawl, 38, was a construction foreman from outside Los Angeles, physically strong, confident in high-risk environments, and comfortable making decisions under pressure. He had spent his career working at heights, around heavy machinery, and in conditions where situational awareness meant the difference between going home and not. He approached the dive the same way he approached a job site: assess the equipment, trust the structure, get in and get it done. He was diving with a group of friends. The operation used a submerged cage lowered approximately 5 meters below the surface, supplied by airlines from the boat above. The cage was not a modern standard commercial model, but an older design with a slightly modified lower section, sections that had been reworked and showed signs of wider than typical spacing. The steel bars were welded in a grid pattern intended to prevent entry, but along the lower panel, the gaps were noticeably wider than current safety norms, likely a result of wear, modification, or outdated construction rather than intentional design. Earlier divers had noticed how much easier it was to see bait through those lower gaps. Nobody flagged it as a concern. Great white sharks are built for high-speed predatory strikes, larger, more streamlined, and capable of sudden vertical acceleration from below. Unlike bulkier species, they rely on precision timing and explosive force, often committing to a single decisive bite. Their jaws do not need full entry to cause catastrophic damage. Even partial contact is enough. At Guadalupe, they are the primary species drawn to baited cage dives. Bevan positioned himself near the bottom edge of the cage as bait was lowered beneath the structure. His legs were close to the widened lower bars. In the reduced visibility, shapes appeared and disappeared in the murk, dark silhouettes gliding just beyond clear sight. This was the fatal mistake. Standing with his leg pressed directly against the widest gap in the cage during active baiting below, a great white shark approached from beneath at a steep upward angle, accelerating toward the bait in a committed vertical burst. In the reduced visibility, there was no warning, no slow pass, no circling. The shark came straight up. Its head did not enter the cage. Instead, as it surged upward, its jaws snapped laterally across the exterior of the bars, teeth projecting through the widened gap just enough to intercept Bevan's exposed lower leg. The bite occurred entirely from outside the cage. The force was immediate and catastrophic. The shark's teeth, broad, triangular, and heavily serrated, cut through wetsuit material, skin, and muscle in an instant. The bite drove his leg into the steel bars, pinning him in place rather than pulling him outward. His body slammed against the cage from the inside. The shark executed a single lateral thrash, a violent rotational movement lasting less than a second before releasing. That one motion was enough. The thrash tore through deep tissue and shattered bone, producing compound fractures in the lower leg. The femoral artery was likely severed or critically damaged by the combination of direct bite trauma and twisting force transmitted upward through the limb. The shark withdrew immediately. It did not return. One approach, one bite, one thrash, and it was gone. Blood poured from the wound at a rate no field intervention could control. The water inside the cage turned dark within seconds. Bevan remained conscious initially, gripping the bars above him, but his strength faded rapidly. His dive partners signaled distress, and emergency ascent began immediately. During the lift, approximately 1 minute after the bite, Bevan lost consciousness. By the time the cage broke the surface, There was no pulse to recover. He died from exsanguination, a single external strike from a great white that exploited a structural spacing flaw without ever breaching the cage itself. The incident triggered an investigation into cage bar spacing standards and whether submerged cages with widened lower sections should be permitted during active baiting. Public reaction centered on a single question: how could a cage designed to keep sharks out still allow a fatal bite through it? It was March 22, 2017, and the pristine waters surrounding Nassau in the Bahamas beckoned thousands of tourists seeking underwater adventures, where coral reefs flourished in shallow, protected waters perfect for beginners. Among these hopeful adventurers was Mara Flynn, a 28-year-old marketing executive whose Dublin office seemed a world away from this tropical paradise. Flynn had completed her open water certification just 3 weeks earlier at a local dive shop in Ireland, where cold, murky quarry conditions had left her feeling anxious and uncertain about her underwater skills. Her boyfriend Andrew, an experienced underwater photographer, had spent weeks convincing her to try a tropical reef dive during their romantic getaway. Flynn's certification had been technically successful, but her instructor had noted her obvious anxiety and rapid air consumption during the confined water sessions. The cold Irish waters had done little to build her confidence, and she had barely met the minimum requirements for certification. Despite Andrew's suggestion to start with a simple shallow reef tour, Flynn was determined to conquer her fears and surprise him with her courage by joining the shark encounter excursion. Andrew had expressed serious concerns about Flynn's readiness for such an ambitious dive, given her recent certification and obvious nervousness. However, Flynn's determination seemed unshakable, and the resort's liability waivers had been signed. Her certification, though recent and minimal, technically qualified her for the guided reef shark encounter. Caribbean reef sharks represent one of the ocean's more predictable predators, typically growing to modest lengths of 4 to 6 feet. These sleek hunters patrol coral reefs with methodical precision, their bronze-colored bodies perfectly adapted for life among the coral formations. Unlike their larger cousins, Caribbean reef sharks rarely show aggression toward humans, preferring to maintain distance while investigating potential threats or disturbances. However, these sharks possess the same acute sensory systems as all their relatives, detecting minute electrical fields and responding to unusual vibrations or erratic behavior. When their environment becomes disrupted, or when they encounter panicked movements, they may respond with defensive investigative behavior to assess potential threats. Flynn's descent to 25 feet immediately revealed her inexperience as she struggled to control her buoyancy and breathing rate. The other divers in the group maintained proper formation, but Flynn lagged behind, her movements jerky and unpredictable. Her air consumption had already reached concerning levels when the first shark made its approach, a routine investigative pass that experienced divers would barely notice. The shark's close-range approach triggered Flynn's complete panic response. She abandoned all training protocols, shooting toward the surface in an uncontrolled ascent that violated every safety rule she had learned weeks earlier. The rapid ascent from 25 feet caused pulmonary barotrauma as expanding air in her lungs had nowhere to escape, creating chest pain and breathing difficulties. Combined with panic-induced hyperventilation, Flynn became hypoxic and disoriented as her coordination deteriorated rapidly. Flynn's frantic thrashing and irregular breathing patterns activated the shark's defensive instincts. Interpreting her erratic movements as a potential threat, the predator delivered a defensive investigative bite to her left shoulder. Not a predatory attack, but a warning response to assess the strange, thrashing creature. The bite caused moderate tissue damage and immediate bleeding, though not the devastating wounds associated with true predatory strikes. One additional shark made a cautious pass through the area, drawn by the disturbance and blood in the water, but maintained its distance after determining there was no food source present. The second shark's presence added to the chaos, but did not escalate to aggressive behavior. Flynn's wetsuit tore under the defensive bite as the shark's teeth penetrated through neoprene and flesh. Her regulator remained functional, but her compromised respiratory state from the barotrauma and panic prevented effective breathing. The combination of pulmonary injury, moderate blood loss from her shoulder wound, panic-induced hypoxia, and her inability to control her breathing resulted in Flynn losing consciousness underwater. The dive master's rescue attempt proved challenging as Flynn had already succumbed to the combination of injuries and drowning before she could be brought to the surface, Her death resulted primarily from drowning complicated by panic and lung injury, rather than the shark bite itself. Bahamian authorities immediately suspended the specific operator's shark diving operations, pending a comprehensive safety review of their procedures and guide protocols. Flynn's family requested privacy while thanking the dive crew for their rescue efforts. It was December 19, 1959, in the early morning hours along the coast of Wynnum, a quiet suburb on the shores of Moreton Bay near Brisbane, Australia. The sun had barely begun its ascent over the Coral Sea, casting a golden glow across the choppy waters. Moreton Bay, where freshwater rivers meet the ocean, created a unique ecosystem teeming with marine life. The bay's murky waters, stirred by overnight winds, reduced visibility to mere feet below the surface. This mixing of fresh and salt water made it an ideal habitat for one of the ocean's most dangerous predators, the bull shark, a species known for its aggressive nature and ability to thrive in both environments. Stanley Mullins, a 29-year-old local fisherman, had risen before dawn that morning with a specific purpose. A father of 5 young children, Stanley worked tirelessly to provide for his large family. With Christmas only days away, he needed extra money to buy presents for his children. He had convinced his closest friend, Raphael Bishop, a 31-year-old dock worker, to join him for an early morning crabbing expedition. The two men had been friends since childhood, sharing countless fishing trips over the years. Raphael was more cautious by nature, but he trusted Stanley's experience on the water. They launched their small wooden dinghy from the beach at 5:30 in the morning, paddling through the breaking waves into increasingly rough seas. The water was warm for early summer, conditions known to increase bull shark activity. The choppy surface and poor visibility created dangerous circumstances, but Stanley was determined. They needed a good catch to make the trip worthwhile. After paddling for an extended time, the two friends reached a spot several hundred yards from shore in the deeper bay waters, far from immediate help. They began lowering baited crab pots into the murky water around 6:15. The fresh bait sent scent trails drifting through the current, and the vibrations from their boat created disturbances that traveled far through the water column. Unknown to the two men, these signals were being detected by predators lurking below. Bull sharks are considered one of the most dangerous shark species due to their frequent overlap with human activity. Unlike most sharks that require salt water to survive, bull sharks possess a unique ability to regulate salt in their bodies, allowing them to travel freely between ocean and river systems. They are stocky, powerful animals, typically reaching lengths of 7 to 11 feet, with females growing larger than males. Their blunt snouts house powerful jaws filled with triangular, serrated teeth, designed for crushing and tearing. Bull sharks are responsible for more attacks on humans than any species except great white sharks, largely due to their aggressive temperament and tendency to hunt in shallow, murky waters where people swim and fish. They are opportunistic feeders, investigating any disturbance that might signal potential prey. Beneath Stanley and Raphael's dinghy, at least one bull shark had been drawn to the area by scent and vibration. Bull sharks are typically solitary hunters, and while multiple individuals may be attracted to the same area by food sources, they do not coordinate attacks or hunt cooperatively. The shark circled slowly in the murky depths below, investigating the disturbance above. The morning progressed successfully. Stanley and Raphael hauled in crab after crab, filling their buckets. The boat rocked steadily in the choppy surf, waves slapping against the wooden hull. At approximately 7:20, as Stanley reached over the side to pull up another pot, his oar slipped from its position and fell into the water. The oar floated away quickly, pushed by waves and current. Without both oars, navigating back through the rough surf would be nearly impossible. Stanley made a split-second decision. Without warning Raphael or scanning the water around them, he pulled off his shirt and dove headfirst into the sea. The splash was substantial. Stanley's pale skin contrasted sharply against the dark water as he swam with strong strokes toward the drifting oar. His movements were erratic, his kicks creating surface disturbance, exactly the kind of signals that attract investigating sharks. He reached the oar within seconds and grabbed it, turning back toward the boat now 20 feet away. He pushed the oar ahead of him, kicking his legs in a flutter motion near the surface. Raphael stood in the boat, reaching out to help his friend aboard. When Stanley was approximately 8 feet from the dinghy, a large bull shark struck from below. The shark had been tracking his movements, rising through the water column. Its jaws opened wide, revealing rows of serrated teeth. The mouth clamped onto Stanley's lower body with devastating force, causing severe deep tissue and joint damage. Stanley released a single, piercing scream. The shark released him almost immediately, but the damage was already fatal. Massive blood loss and trauma sent him beneath the surface within seconds. The violent strike caused immediate turbulence at the surface. Blood began spreading rapidly through the water. Stanley was pulled beneath the surface in seconds, disappearing into the murky depths. The water churned briefly before returning to its choppy state. Only the abandoned oar floated nearby as evidence of the horror that had just occurred. Raphael stared at the empty water, unable to process what he had witnessed. He called out Stanley's name repeatedly, scanning desperately for any sign of his friend. Shock and terror gripped him. After moments of stunned searching, fear overtook him, forcing the realization that staying meant risking his own life. Alone in a small dinghy with a single oar, in waters where a massive predator had just attacked, Raphael made the agonizing decision to paddle back to shore. The journey took over an hour, fighting against the current and waves. He immediately contacted authorities upon reaching land, and an extensive search operation was launched. Boats scoured the area throughout the day and into the following days. 3 days later, on December 22nd, professional fisherman Desmond Burks was working his nets approximately 2 miles from the attack site when he spotted something floating in the water. Upon closer inspection, he discovered Stanley's body. Burks pulled the remains aboard and immediately radioed authorities. The body showed evidence of catastrophic trauma. The left arm was completely severed. Deep lacerations covered the torso and legs. Large sections of the body remained intact due to protective clothing and limited tidal drift in the bay's calmer waters. The medical examiner's report noted extensive shark-inflicted damage. Based on the varying sizes and patterns of bite marks on the recovered body, the examiner concluded that while one large bull shark was responsible for the fatal attack, at least 2 additional sharks had scavenged the body post-mortem. This is consistent with typical shark behavior. They are attracted to blood and distress signals, but they do not hunt cooperatively. The cause of death was determined to be massive trauma and blood loss from the initial attack, with the victim likely losing consciousness within seconds. The local newspaper reported the tragedy, describing how a father of 5 had been killed by sharks while crabbing offshore. Stanley's death sent shockwaves through the Brisbane fishing community. His wife and 5 children were left without a husband and father just days before Christmas. The incident prompted warnings about swimming and fishing in Moreton Bay during early morning hours when shark activity peaks. It was February 9th, 2014, and the waters off Bondi Beach shimmered under the afternoon sun as Kieran Doyle guided his rental jet ski beyond the designated swim zone. Kieran was a 37-year-old appliance delivery driver from Perth, known among colleagues for his easygoing nature and tendency to squeeze adventure into every free day. He had arrived in Sydney 3 days earlier for what he called a reset trip, a solo week away from the routine of loading refrigerators and navigating delivery schedules. His social media showed photos of coastal walks and beachside meals, but what he wanted most was to get out on the water. He had never operated a jet ski before that afternoon. At the rental kiosk near the south end of Bondi, Kieran paid for a 30-minute ride and signed the standard waiver without reading it fully. The attendant, a university student working a summer job, provided a brief verbal safety rundown. Stay within the buoys, avoid swimmers, and if the engine cuts out, remain on the craft and signal for help. The attendant noted that Kieran nodded, seemingly eager to get moving. He had no boating experience and no understanding of how quickly circumstances could shift beyond the surf line. The attendant did not insist he attach the kill cord, and Kieran never clipped it on. The outer zone of Bondi Beach drops off sharply where the sandbar ends, creating a nutrient-rich upwelling that attracts bait fish and, consequently, larger predators. Great white sharks are among the ocean's most efficient hunters, growing to commonly between 11 and 16 feet in length. Their 300 serrated teeth are designed to shear through flesh and bone, and their ampullae of Lorenzini detect very close low-frequency electric fields. Though in open water they are more often drawn by splashing, injured baitfish, or strong vibrations. They typically strike from below with explosive force, often breaching entirely out of the water when targeting seals. Approximately 15 minutes into his ride, Kieran's jet ski began sputtering roughly 400 yards from shore, just beyond where the rescue buoys marked the edge of safe swimming. He attempted to restart it 3 times, each effort resulting in a weak cough from the engine before it died completely. Beachgoers later reported seeing him wave once toward the shore, but without urgency. 2 lifeguards stationed in the elevated tower noted the stalled craft through binoculars and began preparing a rescue board, following standard protocol for disabled watercraft. They estimated a response time of 3 to 4 minutes. What Kieran failed to recognize, and what the lifeguards would later emphasize in their incident reports, was the dorsal fin that surfaced briefly about 50 feet behind his jet ski during his second restart attempt. Rather than waiting on the jet ski as instructed, Kieran slipped into the water, holding onto the side of the craft with his left hand, while attempting to manipulate something beneath the hull with his right, possibly the intake grate, which sometimes became clogged with seaweed. The two lifeguards, now paddling hard on their rescue boards approximately 150 yards out, saw the large dorsal fin resurface much closer to Kieran's position. Both began shouting warnings and waving their arms. Several witnesses on the beach heard the shouts and turned to look. Kieran turned his head toward the sound just as the water around him seemed to shift and darken. The great white rose from below with stunning speed, its momentum carrying both shark and victim upward against the hull of the jet ski, with enough force to tip the craft onto its side as Kieran's weight shifted in the water. The shark's jaws closed across Kieran's waist with devastating precision, its upper teeth sinking into his lower back, while the bottom row crushed through his abdomen. Witnesses described seeing a massive bite that engulfed his torso, while the lower half remained partially visible for a few seconds before being dragged under by the shark. The shark shook its head laterally once, a behavior used to tear off large chunks, then circled briefly before returning for another bite. The upper torso remained firmly in the jaws as the shark tore through muscle and bone. Rather than a clean separation, the lower half was gradually pulled under with water movement and the shark's own momentum. The water erupted in a dark red bloom that spread rapidly across the surface. The jet ski, now capsized, drifted slowly in a circle. One of Kieran's sandals floated free, bobbing in the expanding blood slick. The lifeguards, still 75 yards away, immediately radioed for backup and a rescue boat. They reached the area within 2 minutes of the attack, but there was nothing to rescue, only the overturned jet ski and the unmistakable evidence of catastrophic predation. A surf life-saving rescue boat arrived approximately 6 minutes after the initial emergency call, along with 2 police vessels. Divers located Kieran's remains roughly 30 feet below the surface, lodged against an outcropping of rock approximately 80 yards from the attack site. Additional remains were recovered the following morning, washed onto rocks at the southern end of Bronte Beach, just over a mile away. The coroner's report noted death by exsanguination and catastrophic trauma, with injuries consistent with a large predatory shark. Bite radius measurements suggested a shark between 14 and 16 feet in length. Bondi Beach remained closed for 4 days following the attack, during which aerial patrols spotted multiple great whites in the area. Kieran's family traveled from Perth to claim his remains, and a small funeral service was held at a chapel overlooking the Indian Ocean, far from the beach that had taken him. The morning of September 3, 2015, dawned with perfect conditions in Galveston Bay, Texas. The sky was a brilliant blue canvas stretching over the famous Gulf Coast, with just enough offshore breeze to create ideal fishing conditions. David Walter, 26, and his charter fishing business couldn't have asked for better weather to take 4 tourists from Dallas on the fishing trip of their dreams. David was exactly the kind of entrepreneur who embodied the American dream. The first-generation immigrant had built his charter business from nothing, and his clients loved his infectious enthusiasm and ability to find fish in any conditions. Friends described him as methodical and safety-conscious, always checking his equipment twice, but also driven by an almost obsessive desire to give his customers the perfect fishing experience. The Dallas tourists were celebrating a bachelor party, and David had promised them action in the productive waters near the Galveston jetties. They had spent their first few hours on the water pulling in red snapper and speckled trout, with David expertly managing the boat while the cooler filled with their catch. David had navigated to his favorite fishing spot just 1 mile offshore, where the depth dropped to 25 feet and attracted schools of bait fish and the predators that hunted them. The tourists were having the time of their lives, already talking about booking another trip. But as they prepared to move to a new location for the afternoon bite, disaster struck. The boat's engine coughed, sputtered, and died completely, leaving them drifting in the strong Gulf current toward the busy shipping channel. David immediately diagnosed the problem, a clogged fuel filter that should have been a simple fix. But as he worked on the engine, the boat's anchor began dragging in the powerful current. The situation was becoming dangerous, and David knew he had to act fast. Local charter captains had warned about recent unusual activity in the area, but such warnings were common in Texas waters. The water had been murky since recent storms, making it harder to see what might be lurking beneath the surface. David had fished these waters for years without incident, and he reasoned that the popular fishing spot would be safe with other boats nearby. With his clients growing nervous about their drifting boat, David made a fateful decision. He stripped down and dove overboard to manually reset the anchor, hoping to stabilize their position while he fixed the engine. What David didn't know was that he had entered the hunting grounds of one of the Gulf's most dangerous predators. Bull sharks are among the most adaptable killers in the ocean, equally at home in saltwater and freshwater environments. These stocky, powerful hunters possess specialized kidneys that allow them to regulate salt levels in their blood, enabling them to swim far up rivers and into freshwater lakes where other sharks cannot survive. This unique adaptation means bull sharks can appear virtually anywhere there's water, from the open ocean to golf course ponds miles inland. Their aggressive temperament and willingness to investigate anything in their territory makes them responsible for more unprovoked attacks on humans than any other species except great whites. With a bite force of 1,350 pounds per square inch and electroreceptors that can detect electrical fields from several meters away, bull sharks employ a relentless bite and release pattern, striking multiple times with the tenacity of a pit bull until their prey stops moving. David worked underwater to free the stuck anchor, but the current was stronger than expected, and the anchor had become wedged in debris. The 7-foot bull shark had been patrolling the fishing grounds for hours, drawn by the chum slick created by David's successful charter. The predator's incredibly acute senses detected the electrical fields generated by David's rapidly beating heart and the scent of blood from hundreds of yards away. What happened next occurred with shocking speed. David never saw the shark coming through the murky water. The bull shark struck from behind, its massive jaws clamping down on his leg with crushing force before immediately releasing and circling for another attack. The impact was so violent that David's clients heard his muffled scream through the water. David fought desperately to reach the surface, but the bull shark continued its relentless assault. True to their species' aggressive nature, the predator struck again and again, each bite tearing away more flesh. The shark's persistence was terrifying. Once committed to an attack, bull sharks rarely give up, continuing until their prey stops moving. The multiple attacks created a feeding frenzy mentality, and the murky water became a churning mass of blood and violence. David's clients watched in horror as the water around their boat turned red. They screamed for help and radioed the Coast Guard, but David had already disappeared beneath the surface, overwhelmed by the bull shark's relentless assault. The Coast Guard arrived nearly an hour later, finding only David's torn shorts floating in blood-stained water. The bull shark had vanished into the murky depths, leaving behind only traumatic memories for 4 witnesses who would never return to the ocean. David's body was never recovered. His charter business died with him, and the incident prompted new safety protocols requiring emergency beacons and backup communication systems. David's story became a cautionary tale told in every boating safety course along the Texas coast. It was March 5th, 2015, off the north shore of Oahu, Hawaii, a coastline known for massive surf, deep channels, and warm, nutrient-rich water, supporting one of the densest shark populations in the Central Pacific. Beneath the surface, visibility was good, but the water column dropped off sharply beyond the reef line, creating a transition zone where open ocean predators regularly cruise near the shallows. Tour boats operated year-round, running snorkel and cage diving excursions marketed as safe, controlled encounters with pelagic sharks. The conditions that morning were calm on the surface. Underneath, the current was steady and the water was active. Tana Brock, 29, was a retail manager from Portland, Oregon. She had no background in marine activities. She was not a strong swimmer and had never been in open ocean water before. Hawaii was a vacation, a week off with friends. The cage dive was not her idea. She had been talked into it, reassured by the operator's safety record and the promise that participants would remain enclosed. For someone with no frame of reference for ocean risk, the cage represented a guarantee. The operation used a floating surface cage with a side entry door secured by a sliding bolt latch. The design was simple: slide the bolt forward and the door locks flush. But the latch had a known flaw. It could appear fully engaged while only partially seated, leaving the bolt resting against the strike plate without entering the receiver. Without a firm pull test, there was no reliable way to confirm full engagement. On this dive, the crew performed only a visual check and skipped the pull test, a brief oversight. The door was closed and visually confirmed, but not physically tested. Tiger sharks are the dominant large predator in Hawaiian waters. They are powerful and adapted to coastal environments where human activity overlaps with their hunting patterns. Unlike great whites, which often strike and release, tiger sharks show sustained investigative behavior. They approach slowly, circle deliberately, and engage unfamiliar objects through direct contact, often with their mouths. A single exploratory bite can be fatal due to the damage from their serrated jaws. Tana entered the cage with her group. Tiger sharks were already circling at a distance, slow, wide passes tightening as the boat drew attention. The water was clear enough to track them. Everything appeared controlled. Then Tana leaned back against the side door. The partially seated bolt disengaged under her weight. The door swung outward and she fell into open water. There was no warning. One moment she was inside the cage. The next she was outside it, surfacing with multiple tiger sharks nearby. She surfaced and immediately tried to swim back. The distance was short, only a few meters, but she was not a capable swimmer, and the shock of sudden exposure caused rapid loss of coordination. A tiger shark adjusted its path and approached. The pass was slow and direct. It delivered a single exploratory bite to her upper leg. The teeth cut deep into the quadriceps, severing muscle and major blood vessels. The injury was immediately debilitating. Her ability to kick dropped to almost nothing. Blood entered the water. The shark circled away briefly, then returned on a second pass. The interval lasted seconds, consistent with investigative behavior. This time, it targeted the torso. The bite was deeper, jaws closing across the midsection with enough force to penetrate the abdominal wall. The damage was severe. Internal bleeding began on a scale that could not be reversed in open water. The shark released and moved off. The interaction was not frenzied. No thrashing, no rapid repeated strikes. 2 deliberate passes. Tana lost mobility almost immediately after the second bite. She remained at the surface briefly, but was unable to swim or maintain position. Crew attempted recovery, but were delayed due to the shark remaining nearby. By the time they reached her, about 1 to 2 minutes after the door failure, she was unresponsive. She had lost consciousness from blood loss. She died from cumulative injuries sustained during the 2-bite events. The morning of September 27th, 2015 was everything the Red Sea is known for in the final weeks of summer. The water was warm and extraordinarily clear, visibility stretching 30 meters in every direction. The reef below lit up in the way that makes people understand why they traveled thousands of miles to be here. The surface was flat, the winds light, and the conditions were, by every visible measure, perfect. Ahmed Nasser had described mornings exactly like this one to tourists for 11 years. Ahmed was 36, a Red Sea tour guide based out of Hurghada, who had led more snorkeling trips than he could count across a career that had started when he was barely out of school. He knew the water the way people know their own neighborhoods, the currents, the reef formations, the way the light changed through the afternoon, the spots that were reliable and the spots that required more care. He was calm and competent in the water, the kind of guide that tourists trusted immediately because he carried himself like someone who had never been surprised by anything the ocean had done. That familiarity was, in the end, the thing that killed him. He had chosen an offshore site that day specifically because it was less crowded, a quieter alternative to the main tourist reefs, further out, with better visibility and more interesting marine life. It was a site he had used before without incident. What he didn't know was that a fishing vessel had discarded fish waste in the area earlier that morning. The scent trail was already in the water by the time Ahmed's group arrived. The ocean, from the surface, looked exactly as it always did. His group entered the water in good spirits, a mix of experienced snorkelers and beginners, the kind of group Ahmed had managed dozens of times. He positioned himself at the edge of the group as he always did, watching the perimeter, keeping count. For the first few minutes, the dive was everything he had promised. Clear water, healthy reef, the kind of underwater visibility that makes people understand why people become obsessed with the ocean. Then the fish disappeared. It happened quietly. The reef fish that had been moving through the coral simply weren't there anymore. The water grew still in a way that had a different quality than ordinary stillness. Ahmed noticed it. He had seen something like this before. But 11 years of leading tours without a serious incident had built a layer of professional confidence that sat between his instincts and his decisions. And in that moment, the confidence won. He began moving the group toward the boat, calmly, without alarming anyone, the way a good guide does. He did not call them out urgently. He did not treat it as an emergency. The oceanic white-tip appeared shortly after, a single shark, moving with the slow, deliberate confidence that characterizes the species in open water. It began circling at a moderate distance. Ahmed watched it and kept the group moving. He had seen sharks on tours before. Then one of the swimmers panicked. Everything changed at once. The splashing, the sudden erratic movement at the surface, the noise, it hit the water like a signal. The shark's behavior shifted immediately, its wide circles collapsing inward. Ahmed moved toward the panicking swimmer without hesitation, placing himself between the group and the shark, doing exactly what a responsible guide would do. In doing so, he became the most active, most visible figure in the water. What followed was not a sequence that anyone on the boat could describe with clarity afterward. It happened too fast and with too much chaos for that. The shark came in hard, a sudden strike, contact, and then the water around Ahmed erupted into confusion. Snorkelers were screaming, scrambling for the ladder, the crew pulling people aboard with both hands. Someone threw a line, someone else was in the way. The shark was still in the water, still moving, and the group between Ahmed and the boat made retrieval nearly impossible to coordinate. Ahmed sustained fatal injuries before the chaos on the surface could be resolved enough to reach him. By the time the last snorkeler was aboard and the crew could focus entirely on Ahmed, it was too late. He was pulled from the water, but he was already gone. Egyptian maritime authorities opened a formal investigation within 24 hours. The site was closed to tourist operations for 6 weeks and reopened with new protocols, mandatory pre-dive water checks, stricter group positioning guidelines, and emergency signaling requirements for all guides. It was September 18, 2017, when the late afternoon sun began its descent over Boa Viagem Beach in Recife, Pernambuco, Brazil. The coastline stretched along the urban waterfront, its golden sand giving way to a man-made channel that cut perpendicular through the beach to facilitate water drainage and navigation. The channel's dark waters flowed steadily as the outgoing tide pulled river water through the artificial cut toward the open ocean. Dusk lighting conditions were rapidly reducing underwater visibility, transforming the already murky channel into an opaque corridor where shapes became indistinct. Warning signs posted along the beach clearly indicated the dangers of entering the channel, particularly during tidal changes when currents strengthened and predators moved through the passage. Rex Flinch, a 35-year-old software quality assurance analyst, had arrived at the beach with 2 friends for an evening surf session during a brief break from demanding workweek schedules. The confident swimmer and recreational surfer had paddled out with his companions, both in their early 30s, who remained near the inner break where waves rolled more gently. The trio sought to maximize their limited time in the water, chasing better wave formations near the outer break beyond the channel. This required crossing the man-made channel, a decision that would prove fatal as conditions deteriorated with approaching darkness. Bull sharks represent one of the most dangerous shark species to humans, their aggressive nature bringing them into frequent contact with coastal populations. These powerful predators thrive equally in saltwater and freshwater environments, regularly traveling up rivers and through estuarine channels in search of prey. Their stocky bodies typically reach 8 to 11 feet in length and can exceed 500 pounds. The species possesses broad, flat snouts, housing tremendous bite force concentrated in wide, heavily serrated teeth designed for maximum damage. Bull sharks demonstrate particular aggression during feeding periods, attacking with explosive speed and returning for multiple bites until their target is incapacitated. Unlike many shark species that avoid brackish waters, bull sharks actively seek out river mouths, drainage channels, and areas where fresh water mixes with salt. These transitional zones provide abundant prey, and reduced visibility offers tactical advantages when hunting. Recife's coastline has earned a reputation as one of the world's most dangerous beaches for shark attacks, with bull sharks responsible for the majority of incidents. The man-made channel at Boa Viagem Beach creates an ideal hunting corridor, funneling both prey and predators through a confined space during tidal changes. Rex entered the channel to reach the outer break, paddling his surfboard across the flowing water as dusk settled. The outgoing tide pulled strongly, carrying river sediment and reducing visibility to near zero. This timing represented a catastrophic error, as dusk marks prime feeding hours for bull sharks, and outgoing tides concentrate prey species in predictable channels. A bull shark surged upward from the deeper channel water, its presence completely hidden by the murky conditions and fading light. The shark detected the vibrations from Rex's paddling and the electrical signals generated by his movements. The attack began with devastating precision. The bull shark's jaws clamped onto Rex's lower leg with tremendous force, the serrated teeth cutting deep into the calf muscle and sever structural damage. The bite severed muscle groups, tendons, and smaller blood vessels, though the initial wound, while severe, was not immediately fatal. Rex attempted to paddle back toward shallow water despite the crippling pain and damage to his leg. However, the bull shark circled through the dark water and returned for a second attack, this time targeting higher on the same leg. The second bite struck the thigh with even greater force. The shark's teeth tore through the quadriceps muscle and punctured deep into the femoral triangle, severing the femoral artery. This major blood vessel ruptured catastrophically, releasing blood into the water at a rate that guaranteed rapid exsanguination. The femoral artery carries oxygenated blood from the heart to the lower extremities under significant pressure, and its complete severing creates hemorrhaging that proves almost impossible to control. Rex's circulatory system began failing within seconds. The shark retreated into deeper water after the second bite. Rex's two friends witnessed the attacks and immediately paddled toward him, grabbing him and his surfboard to bring him back to shore. Blood poured from both leg wounds, creating a spreading cloud in the channel water. They dragged Rex onto the beach, attempting to apply pressure to the massive thigh wound, but the arterial damage proved too extensive. The blood loss accelerated despite their efforts, Rex's blood pressure dropping rapidly as his body entered hypovolemic shock. Rex Flinch died on the beach before advanced medical care could arrive, the hemorrhage from his femoral artery impossible to control. The time from the second bite to his death was measured in minutes. Local authorities confirmed the attack involved a bull shark based on bite patterns and the channel location. The incident reinforced existing warnings about entering the Boa Viagem channel during dusk and tidal changes. Rex's family released a statement expressing their loss of a beloved son and brother. It was March 11, 2016, and the sun was beginning its descent over Ilha Grande, casting amber light across the bay where the Atlantic met the Brazilian coastline. By nightfall, the waters off Praia de Palmas would be stained with blood, and a young woman's honeymoon would end not in celebration, but in a tragedy. Liana Corso was a 29-year-old dental assistant from São Paulo, known among her colleagues for her meticulous attention to detail and her ability to put anxious patients at ease. She had met her husband, Tiago, 3 years earlier at a mutual friend's birthday party, and their courtship had been marked by weekend trips to beach towns along the coast. Friends said that Liana loved the ocean with an almost childlike enthusiasm, having grown up inland and only discovering swimming in her late teens. The honeymoon to Ilha Grande had been Tiago's idea, a quiet, relatively undeveloped island where they could escape the noise of the city. They had arrived 4 days earlier and spent their time hiking forest trails and exploring secluded beaches. Liana had told the hotel staff she wanted to swim every day, even joking that she would go in at night if the water was warm enough. She was a confident swimmer, though not particularly experienced in open water, according to Tiago, and she approached the ocean with more enthusiasm than caution. The bay curved gently around Praia de Palmas, its waters deceptively calm in the protected inlet. Tiger sharks are opportunistic predators, typically reaching lengths of 10 to 15 feet and weighing up to 1,400 pounds. Their teeth are adapted for slicing through flesh and bone. They hunt primarily during twilight hours when visibility is low, patrolling shallow waters where prey is most vulnerable. That morning, the hotel manager had mentioned to guests at breakfast that local fishing boats often cleaned their catch near the shore, dumping fish carcasses and blood into the water. He suggested, in measured terms, that swimming at dusk was not advisable due to increased shark activity. Liana had smiled politely, but later told Tiago she thought Brazilian locals were overly dramatic about wildlife dangers. She had swum in the ocean dozens of times without incident. No lifeguards were on duty, and there were no official shark warning signs posted at the beach. By late afternoon, the couple walked down to the beach. The water was warm and clear, small waves lapping gently at the sand. Tiago wanted to photograph the sunset and set up his camera on a tripod near the tree line. Liana waded in alone, her yellow bikini bright against the darkening water. Two kayakers were visible about 180 feet offshore, paddling parallel to the beach. Liana moved into waist-deep water, perhaps 40 feet from shore. She turned back toward Tiago and waved. Beneath her, the sandy bottom dropped away sharply into deeper water. The kayakers later reported seeing bait fish suddenly scatter near the surface, creating sudden splashes and shadows beneath the water, a natural warning sign experienced fishermen recognize. The tiger shark struck with a single, powerful bite. Its jaws clamped around Liana's pelvis and upper thighs. The bite caused partial pelvic severance with ragged tissue and trauma to the upper thighs, consistent with a 13 to 15-foot tiger shark. The animal did not sustain feeding in shallow water. It retreated after the bite. Blood erupted into the water in thick clouds, the surface churning from the shark's thrashing tail. Her arms flailed once, twice, then went slack. The animal submerged with part of her lower body still in its jaws, leaving torn tissue behind, before moving back into deeper water. Her body floated face down, partially buoyant from trapped air in her lungs. The water around her had turned dark red, spreading outward in an expanding radius. Tiago's screams brought hotel staff running to the beach. One of the kayakers had already begun paddling frantically toward shore, shouting for help. A hotel employee called the emergency services. The nearest patrol boat was stationed approximately 4 miles away and arrived 18 minutes after the initial call. By then, Liana had bled out completely. Paramedics could only confirm death at the scene. The coroner's preliminary report noted severe traumatic injuries with partial lower limb amputation, extensive tissue loss to the pelvis and upper thighs, and massive hemorrhagic shock consistent with a single investigatory bite from a tiger shark. Local media coverage was sparse and carefully worded, describing the incident as a rare and unfortunate tragedy. The hotel quietly revised its safety protocols, adding warnings about sunset swimming and posting signs, in addition to requiring signed waivers for any guests entering the water after 4 p.m. Tiago returned to São Paulo with his wife's remains 5 days later. He declined all interview requests and deleted his social media accounts. It was September 3rd, 2015, off the Neptune Islands, South Australia. A remote chain of rocky outcrops surrounded by deep, cold water teeming with marine life. The islands sit at the edge of the continental shelf where nutrient-rich currents draw in large pelagic predators year-round. Seal colonies cluster along the rocks, and where seals gather, apex predators follow. The water was rough that morning. Swells rolled in heavy, rocking everything on the surface. Boats, buoys, and cages alike. Lana Kesh, 31, was a freelance travel vlogger who had built a following documenting close-range wildlife encounters across the globe. She was not reckless by reputation, but she was known for pushing proximity, getting the shot others wouldn't attempt. She had selected this operator specifically because they used a surface-level cage positioned to maximize visibility of shark approaches near the waterline. For Lana, this was content. The closer the animal, the better the footage. She was diving with her partner. The operator ran a fast-paced baiting system, dragging tuna across the surface to keep sharks engaged and circling near the cage. During earlier runs, crew noted repeated close passes from larger sharks, including a tiger shark measured at approximately 4 meters. Activity levels were elevated. The animals were committed. Tiger sharks are among the most versatile and dangerous predators in the ocean. Unlike great whites, which tend toward ambush strikes from below, tiger sharks are lateral hunters, slow cruisers that can explode into short bursts of acceleration. They possess wide jaws lined with serrated teeth designed to shear through bone, shell, and cartilage. A 4-meter tiger shark can generate enormous force in a single-body collision and does not shy from unfamiliar objects. They investigate with contact. Lana positioned herself at the forwardmost section of the cage, pressing close to the bars with her camera extended outward through the gaps. The cage was a surface-level floating design, tethered to the vessel with noticeable slack, enough to allow lateral swing in heavy swells. Bait was pulled across the surface directly in front of her, drawing sharks along a path parallel to the cage wall. This was the fatal mistake. She had placed herself at the exact convergence point, where the bait trajectory met the cage face, with slack tether allowing free movement on impact. The tiger shark came from below at a shallow upward angle, accelerating toward the bait in a committed burst. It did not breach. Instead, it collided laterally into the cage at full speed. The impact was massive. The initial strike delivered a high-energy blunt force event, driving the cage off-axis and transferring momentum into Lana's body. The cage, already loose on its tether, swung violently inward toward the vessel hull. Lana's body was driven into the steel bars by the force of the collision, her chest compressed between the rigid cage and her forward-leaning position. Multiple ribs fractured on impact. This first impact caused the primary injury, severe blunt chest trauma and immediate compromise of lung expansion. Within less than a second, the swinging cage struck the boat hull. The abrupt deceleration intensified compressive force across her torso. This secondary collision acted as the fatal escalation, sharply increasing pressure across her chest cavity. The secondary impact caused pulmonary contusion and ruptured blood vessels within her chest cavity. Internal bleeding began immediately. The shark disengaged instantly after collision. It did not circle back. It did not bite. The entire event lasted under 2 seconds. No jaws involved, no teeth marks. Just force, raw, blunt, mechanical force delivered by an estimated 500 to 900 kilograms of muscle mass hitting a floating steel box with a human pressed against the wrong side of it. Lana remained conscious briefly. She was upright but unable to draw effective breaths. Her chest wall had lost structural integrity. Each inhale produced diminishing returns as fractured ribs shifted and lung tissue swelled. Crew pulled her from the cage immediately, but the damage was internal and catastrophic. Over the next several minutes, her breathing became shallow and labored. Her condition deteriorated due to pulmonary contusion, internal bleeding, and progressive hypoxia. Blood filled the pleural space, compressing her lungs further. Oxygen levels dropped. Loss of effective respiration was not instantaneous, but rapidly progressive over minutes. She died on the deck from traumatic asphyxia compounded by internal hemorrhage, without a single bite wound. The incident prompted a review of cage tethering systems and bait trajectory protocols relative to diver positioning. Public reaction was sharp. Many struggled to understand how a shark could kill someone inside a cage without breaking through it. The summer of 2014 brought perfect weather to Surf Beach, California. Sunshine filtered through the morning mist, painting golden patterns on the glassy ocean surface. Anthony White, 22, and his passion for surfing were exactly what you'd expect from a California marine biology student. The young man had been surfing for 8 years, and his friends described him as the perfect match of fearless adventure and deep respect for ocean life. Anthony was known for his infectious enthusiasm and tendency to seek out remote breaks, while his academic side was more methodical, always researching surf spots and ocean conditions before paddling out. They had spent weeks planning this solo dawn patrol session, and this morning adventure was meant to be the perfect combination of his two passions, surfing and marine biology. The college student had arrived at Surf Beach just as the sun was rising, spending his first hour checking conditions and waxing his board at the remote location. But Anthony had been restless, telling other early morning surfers that the real waves were beyond the crowded spots, despite the area being adjacent to a massive seal rookery at Point Conception. On that fateful morning, Anthony set out early, carrying his 6-foot 2-inch shortboard and minimal safety gear. He had signed the beach access log indicating he planned to surf the main break, but somewhere along the way, Anthony spotted what looked like perfect waves breaking further offshore. Despite the prominent warning signs about marine life in the area, Anthony paddled out 150 yards from shore to position himself in the lineup. The area was beautiful, too beautiful to resist, with seals barking in the distance and crystal clear water revealing the sandy bottom below. While setting up for the perfect wave, Anthony suddenly noticed something that should have alarmed him. The water was unusually quiet, with no other surfers in sight, and the seals had stopped their constant chatter. But he was so focused on catching the wave of the day that Anthony ignored these warning signs. Finally, Anthony had positioned himself perfectly in the lineup and was sitting on his board, legs dangling in the water. Then suddenly, a terrifying silence fell over the ocean. Out of nowhere, there it was, a massive great white shark emerging from the depths 20 feet below where Anthony was sitting. What Anthony didn't realize was that he had entered the domain of one of nature's most efficient predators. Great whites are living fossils that have remained virtually unchanged for millions of years, their torpedo-shaped bodies perfectly designed for explosive attacks. These apex predators can detect blood from up to 500 yards away and sense the electrical impulses of a beating heart from several meters distance. When hunting, great whites approach from the depths in explosive bursts of speed, exceeding 35 miles per hour, using the element of surprise to deliver devastating attacks with bite forces reaching up to 4,000 pounds per square inch. Anthony reacted instantly, but there was nowhere to run. The massive predator struck from directly below, covering the distance between them in a split second. Anthony managed to see the shark's massive form just before impact, but the attack came with such explosive force that both he and his surfboard were launched into the air. The sound of Anthony's screams cut through the morning silence as the shark's jaws clamped down on his torso. He fought desperately, punching at the predator's snout as it held him in its powerful grip, the massive head shaking violently as razor-sharp teeth sliced through flesh and bone. The great white released Anthony after several seconds, typical behavior for these predators when encountering unfamiliar prey. But the damage was already catastrophic. Blood immediately began clouding the pristine water, as Anthony, despite his severe injuries, began paddling frantically toward shore on his damaged board. The shark circled below, following the blood trail, but maintaining its distance, waiting to see if this strange prey would weaken enough to approach safely. Anthony managed to cover nearly half the distance to shore, his movements becoming weaker and more erratic as blood loss and shock overwhelmed his system. A jogger on the beach heard Anthony's desperate screams and immediately called for help, but the remote location meant rescue was still minutes away. By the time lifeguards arrived, Anthony had disappeared beneath the surface, the ocean swallowing him whole. 2 hours later, Anthony's mangled surfboard washed ashore, bearing the unmistakable crescent-shaped bite marks of a great white shark. The massive gouges told the story of an encounter with one of nature's most efficient predators. Anthony's body was never recovered despite extensive search efforts. The university established a memorial scholarship in his name, and Surf Beach was temporarily closed while marine biologists studied great white activity in the area. The attack led to enhanced warning systems and additional safety briefings for surfers. The afternoon of March 3, 2016, brought the kind of calm to Mexico's Pacific coast that makes the water look harmless. The surface ran clear and warm, visibility stretching deep into the reef below. The drop-offs where the shelf fell away into open blue looking from above, like nothing more than a change in color. It was beautiful water. It was also hunting water, and the two things were not unrelated. Miguel Alvarez knew this better than most. He was 44, a veteran spear fisherman who had worked these reefs for over 2 decades, building a reputation up and down the coastline for bringing in larger catches than anyone else and doing it alone. He was lean and weathered in the way that men who spend their lives in the ocean tend to be, unhurried on land, completely at home underwater. Younger fishermen watched the way he moved through the water and understood that it had taken years to look that effortless. What they didn't know was that the effortlessness was under pressure. Financial strain had been building for months, quietly at first, then with an urgency that changed the way Miguel worked. Longer dives, riskier drop-offs, fewer rest days. He had started hunting the reef edges where pelagic species ran deeper and larger, the kind of spots that paid better precisely because they demanded more. His friends had noticed the shift. A few had said something. Miguel had listened politely and gone back, out alone the next morning. On March 3rd, he chose a reef drop-off he knew well, or believed he did. He descended with his spear gun and worked the reef with the efficiency of long practice. Over the course of the dive, he was successful. Several fish, secured to a stringer attached at his waist, trailed behind him as he worked. It was a good day, the kind of day that justified the risk. He didn't notice the silhouette at first. It appeared at the edge of his vision, broad, slow-moving, unhurried in the way that large predators can afford to be. A tiger shark, somewhere around 4 meters, making wide passes at a distance that felt almost respectful. Miguel had seen sharks before. He stayed still, kept his movements controlled, and watched it the way it was watching him. For a time, the standoff held. Then the shark made a low pass. Close, but not striking. Almost casual, the kind of approach that experienced divers recognize as a test. It pulled away and circled again, each pass slightly tighter than the last. The distance between them was shrinking in increments small enough to rationalize but large enough to matter. Miguel made his decision too late. He chose not to release his catch immediately. The fish represented hours of work, real money, a day that had gone well in a stretch of days that hadn't. He hesitated, and in that hesitation, something shifted. By the time he began his ascent, the shark had already closed the distance in a way that left no room for negotiation. The strike came from the side, fast, total, and without the telegraphing that the earlier passes had suggested. A bite to his midsection with the full force of an animal that had made its decision. Miguel was stopped mid-water. The shark pulled away, but the withdrawal was brief. Blood was already spreading through the water in a volume that changed everything around it. What followed was not a structured sequence. It was faster than that, and more chaotic. The shark came back before Miguel had any chance to orient himself. Another contact. Harder, less exploratory. His body was recovered later that afternoon by a fishing vessel working the same stretch of coast. The stringer was still there, the fish he had chosen not to release, still attached to the man who had made that choice. Miguel left behind a wife and 2 teenage sons. It was November 3rd, 2017. Dyer Island, South Africa. Research season in full swing. The waters around Gansby had earned their reputation as the great white capital of the world, where massive predators gathered to hunt Cape Fur seals. Rocky outcroppings jutted from the ocean surface, creating perfect seal rookeries that attracted thousands of marine mammals during breeding season. Joshua King represented everything admirable about marine research. 26 years old, 8 years studying shark behavior, PhD candidate with an impeccable safety record. King had dedicated his career to understanding great white hunting patterns around Seal Island, spending months documenting predatory sequences that few humans had ever witnessed. King's research station operated on minimal funding during the final weeks of the season. Budget constraints meant reduced support staff when equipment required maintenance. His underwater acoustic monitoring system had been recording feeding behavior for weeks, capturing invaluable data about predator-prey interactions. That morning brought concerning news. The primary acoustic monitor had malfunctioned and sunk to 25 feet near the seal colony's edge. King faced a difficult decision: wait for backup support that might not arrive for days, or conduct a brief retrieval dive with minimal surface support despite elevated predator activity. Time pressure mounted as each day without data represented irreplaceable research opportunities. Sibusiso Mthembu, the experienced deckhand, agreed to serve as surface spotter while expressing serious reservations about the timing. King's project supervisor had radioed earlier, emphasizing the critical importance of the failing equipment. The decision was made to proceed with a quick freediving retrieval rather than full scuba operations, which would require additional safety protocols they couldn't implement with skeleton crew. Great white sharks around Dyer Island represent some of the ocean's largest and most aggressive specimens. Adult females commonly exceed 16 feet in length and weigh over 2,500 pounds. These apex predators have perfected ambush hunting techniques over millions of years, using the island's underwater topography to launch devastating attacks on unsuspecting seals. The shark's sensory systems operate with frightening efficiency. Electroreception allows detection of bioelectrical fields at close range during final approach. When hunting near seal colonies, these predators enter heightened states of awareness, responding aggressively to any movement patterns that suggest vulnerable prey. King entered the water at 8:15 a.m., wearing only a wetsuit and mask, carrying emergency signaling equipment. Seal activity remained high around the island's perimeter, with hundreds of animals entering and exiting the water. The decision to freedive rather than use scuba gear was tactical. Shorter bottom time, less equipment noise, and quicker surface intervals. The malfunctioned monitor lay partially buried in sand and kelp at exactly 25 feet depth. King worked methodically during his breath-hold dives to secure lifting bags and prepare the equipment for surface recovery. His movements remained controlled and deliberate, following protocols developed through years of experience. A 16-foot female great white had been patrolling the deeper channels since dawn, her massive form moving through the water with deceptive grace. The shark's hunting instincts remained dormant as King worked at depth, but his repeated surface intervals and diving patterns began to resemble the behavior of a seal making feeding dives. King began his final ascent at 8:47 a.m., breath holding while towing the recovered equipment toward the surface. At 12 feet depth, his silhouette against the bright surface created the perfect illusion of a seal returning from a feeding dive with prey. The massive predator's hunting instincts triggered instantly, as King's freediving profile matched exactly what the shark expected to see. The attack came from below with explosive violence that defied comprehension. The massive shark's jaws opened to reveal rows of triangular teeth as she accelerated upward with tremendous force. King's position in midwater provided no escape route as over 2,500 pounds of apex predator struck with devastating precision. The shark's jaws clamped around King's right leg and hip area with bone-crushing pressure, her teeth penetrating deep into his thigh and pelvis. The single catastrophic bite delivered overwhelming force, instantly fracturing his femur and severing the femoral artery, along with other major blood vessels. Her serrated teeth sliced through muscle and bone with surgical precision, causing immediately unsurvivable trauma. The predator released King's body and disappeared into the depths within 3 seconds. King floated motionless near the surface as blood poured from the massive wounds in his leg and hip. His emergency signaling device remained clipped to his weight belt, but the trauma and rapid blood loss prevented him from activating it manually. Mthembu reached King's position within 2 minutes of the attack, hauling his unconscious form aboard the research vessel while radioing emergency services. King died from massive blood loss and traumatic shock before emergency medical services could reach the remote location. The femoral artery damage alone would have been fatal within minutes, even with immediate medical intervention. South African research authorities launched an immediate investigation into safety protocols for solo diving operations in great white habitats. King's family emphasized his dedication to marine conservation and his deep respect for the predators he studied. New regulations prohibited solo water entries in active hunting zones, regardless of equipment emergencies or staffing limitations. It was July 9, 2018, when the coastline of False Bay stretched along the Cape Town shoreline in South Africa, its beaches drawing families seeking relief from the midday heat. The sky hung overcast, casting a gray pallor across the water and reducing visibility both above and below the surface. Moderate swells rolled in from the Atlantic, creating choppy conditions with intermittent wave sets that broke unevenly across the sandbar. Just offshore, a thriving seal colony occupied rocky outcroppings, the animals barking and diving in their constant search for fish. Their presence transformed this section of coastline into a natural hunting ground for apex predators that patrol these waters year-round. The combination of reduced light conditions and active prey created an environment where predator and potential victim could intersect with devastating consequences. Winnie Blott, a 19-year-old first-year university student, had joined her family for a holiday swim during what appeared to be a calm weather window. The recreational swimmer possessed limited experience in open ocean conditions, her background consisting primarily of pool sessions and occasional beach visits in protected areas. Her family members remained closer to shore in knee-deep water, wading and splashing in the relative safety of the shallows. Great white sharks represent the ocean's most formidable predators, capable of growing to lengths exceeding 12 to 16 feet. These massive hunters possess rows of serrated, triangular teeth that can measure over 2 inches in length, designed specifically for gripping and tearing large marine mammals. Their powerful bodies generate explosive acceleration, allowing them to breach completely out of the water when pursuing seals near the surface. Great whites employ ambush tactics, positioning themselves in deeper water before rocketing upward toward prey silhouettes visible against the lighter surface. Their eyesight proves particularly effective in overcast conditions where dark water contrasts with lighter sky. The sharks patrol areas near seal colonies with methodical precision, their presence often undetected until the moment of attack. False Bay maintains one of the highest concentrations of great white sharks in the world, drawn by abundant seal populations and year-round hunting opportunities. The species demonstrates particular activity during midday hours when seals enter and exit the water, creating predictable movement patterns that sharks exploit. Winnie swam beyond the sandbar during a lull between wave sets, moving into deeper water that placed her directly in the zone where great whites hunt for seals. This decision represented a fatal mistake, as crossing the sandbar meant leaving the protective shallow area and entering territory actively patrolled by apex predators. The choppy water and reduced visibility meant she could not see what approached from below. A great white shark accelerated from depth, its massive body driving upward with tremendous force toward what it perceived as a seal silhouette against the surface. The shark's visual system registered Winnie's profile as matching that of typical prey, triggering an instinctive hunting response perfected over millions of years. The attack came with devastating speed and power. The great white's jaws opened wide before clamping down in a single massive bite that targeted Winnie's torso. The serrated teeth penetrated deep into her midsection, the crushing force causing severe trauma to her core. Major blood vessels were severed, and critical tissue damage occurred throughout the affected area. The bite inflicted catastrophic injuries that proved immediately fatal. The shark maintained its grip momentarily before releasing. Typical behavior when determining its prey is not the high-fat seal it expected. Winnie's body went limp as consciousness faded within seconds. Her family noticed something wrong when they saw the disturbance in the water. They rushed toward her position, reaching her in the deeper section beyond the sandbar where the attack had occurred. The severity of the injuries became immediately apparent as they supported her body and desperately called for help while moving toward shore. Emergency services arrived rapidly, but Winnie Blott had already died from the catastrophic injuries sustained in the attack. The massive trauma and blood loss left no possibility for medical intervention. Her death occurred within minutes of the initial bite. Authorities conducted a thorough investigation, confirming the attack involved a large great white shark based on bite patterns and witness accounts. The incident led to temporary beach closures and renewed discussions about shark safety measures in False Bay. Marine biologists noted that the overcast conditions, seal activity, and Winnie's position beyond the sandbar had created perfect conditions for mistaken identity. It was September 14, 2017, in the early morning hours at Morro Bay, California, a picturesque fishing village on the Central Coast. The town is dominated by Morro Rock, a massive 576-foot volcanic plug rising from the Pacific Ocean. The bay's location within California's Red Triangle places it in one of the world's most concentrated great white shark habitats. September through November represents peak season for these sharks, which patrol the area during dawn and dusk hunting periods. Ellis Ford, a 38-year-old high school biology teacher from San Luis Obispo, had been planning this kayak fishing trip for 3 months. An avid kayak fisherman with 5 years of experience, Ellis was physically fit and confident. His competitive personality often pushed him to catch larger fish than his peers, and he documented his catches for his YouTube channel. Ellis had researched Morro Bay extensively, identifying it as a prime location for catching large halibut and white sea bass near Morro Rock, where fish congregate around underwater structure. Accompanying Ellis was his girlfriend Jennifer, a 36-year-old marine biologist who worked for a state wildlife agency studying sea otters. Jennifer was an experienced kayaker, but far more cautious than Ellis. She had warned him multiple times about fishing near seal colonies during the fall months when great white shark activity peaks. The area near Morro Rock supported a large harbor seal colony of over 200 individuals, which served as a magnet for hunting sharks. Recent reports from local fishermen had documented multiple great white sightings within the previous week. The water temperature was 62 degrees Fahrenheit, optimal for great white activity. They launched their kayaks around 6 in the morning from a local marina. Ellis paddled his 14-foot fishing kayak loaded with rods, tackle, and a GoPro camera mounted on his chest. Jennifer followed in her 12-foot kayak with binoculars and research equipment. Ellis arrived at his chosen fishing spot shortly after launch, positioning himself 300 yards southwest of Morro Rock in water 45 feet deep. Jennifer stayed 400 yards closer to shore, maintaining a safer distance from the seal colony. Great white sharks are apex predators perfectly adapted for hunting. They can detect extremely faint chemical traces and low-frequency vibrations from injured prey. Their electrical sensors detect faint muscle contractions and bioelectric signals produced by nearby prey. Juvenile great whites, like those frequenting Morro Bay, typically measure 8 to 14 feet in length. Their mouths contain rows of triangular serrated teeth designed to tear through flesh and bone. They are ambush predators, often attacking from below at high burst speeds exceeding 15 miles per hour. During fall months, these sharks actively patrol coastal waters hunting seals, their primary prey source. Ellis began fishing shortly after arriving, using live mackerel as bait. Unknown to him, a 14-foot subadult great white shark had been patrolling the area since before dawn, making slow passes between the seal colony and deeper water. The shark was hunting, its senses attuned to any disturbance that might signal prey. Around 7:15, Ellis hooked a large white sea bass. The fish fought hard for over 10 minutes. The fish's struggles created low-frequency vibrations that traveled through the water, detectable by sharks from over a quarter mile away. Ellis brought the exhausted fish to the surface alongside his kayak. The fish thrashed at the surface, splashing water. Ellis reached down and grabbed the fish's gill plate, attempting to lift it into his kayak. Blood from the fish's gills dripped into the water. A great white shark, patrolling deeper water some distance away, detected the vibrations and scent of blood. The shark altered course and began swimming directly toward Ellis's kayak, accelerating rapidly toward the disturbance. Ellis finally managed to drag the white sea bass across his kayak's gunnel. The fish lay across his lap, still bleeding. He was focused entirely on securing his catch, unaware of the predator rising from below. Around 7:30, the great white shark struck Ellis's kayak from below and behind, opened wide as it breached the surface. The shark's jaws clamped down on the rear section of the kayak, its teeth puncturing the plastic hull. Ellis's left leg and lower hip, which were angled toward the rear of the kayak, with the shark's teeth causing deep lacerations to his thigh and severe damage to major blood vessels in his leg. The kayak's hull was crushed, and Ellis sustained catastrophic injuries to his lower extremities. The force of the strike lifted the rear of the kayak completely out of the water. The shark's weight capsized the kayak completely. Ellis was thrown into the water, still attached to the kayak by his ankle leash. He surfaced immediately, gasping and disoriented. Blood poured from catastrophic wounds on his lower body. The shark had descended below the surface after releasing him. Jennifer heard Ellis's scream and saw his capsized kayak 400 yards away. She began paddling toward him as fast as she could. As she approached, she could see blood spreading in the water. She dialed emergency services, reporting a shark attack near Morrow Rock. Ellis was holding onto his capsized kayak, struggling to stay conscious. His legs dangled below the surface. Jennifer reached Ellis within minutes. She found him barely conscious, holding onto his capsized kayak in a spreading pool of blood. A commercial fishing boat responded to her distress calls and pulled Ellis aboard. Despite immediate first aid from a crew member with EMT training, Ellis lost consciousness en route to harbor and never regained a pulse. The boat reached the harbor approximately 25 minutes after the attack, where paramedics were waiting. Ellis was pronounced dead upon arrival at the medical center. The medical examiner documented catastrophic vascular injuries to his leg and hip from the shark attack. The cause of death was exsanguination from severe blood vessel damage sustained during the initial bite. State wildlife investigators examined Ellis's kayak, which showed multiple puncture marks consistent with a large shark bite. Based on bite measurements, the shark was estimated to be 13 to 15 feet in length. Local beaches were closed for 72 hours following the incident. The attack served as a stark reminder of the risks associated with kayak fishing near seal colonies during peak shark season. Ellis's death marked one of the few fatal shark attacks recorded along California's central coast in decades, sending shockwaves through the tight-knit fishing community. His students at San Luis Obispo High School held a memorial service, remembering him as a passionate educator who brought marine biology to life in his classroom. The GoPro camera mounted on Ellis's chest captured portions of the attack, providing researchers with unprecedented footage of great white predatory behavior. The footage would later be used by marine biologists to better understand shark attack patterns and improve safety protocols for ocean recreation. Jennifer struggled with survivor's guilt for months afterward, eventually leaving her research position to become an advocate for shark attack prevention and ocean safety education. It was January 14, 2015, the summer heat bearing down on a crowded stretch of sand north of Durban, South Africa, where the Indian Ocean's deceptively calm surface concealed one of the coast's most efficient predators. Thalina Mokoena, 33, worked as an accounting clerk. She rarely took time off, known among her co-workers for volunteering for weekend shifts and staying late during busy periods. This Tuesday was different. After 6 consecutive weeks of overtime, she had finally agreed to take a personal day. She had brought her 9-year-old niece, Kira, promising the girl's mother a fun beach outing. They had arrived mid-morning, and Thalina had rented a bright yellow inflatable float from a vendor near the parking area. Her friend said that she wasn't a strong swimmer, preferring to stay in waist-deep water where she could touch bottom. The float likely gave her confidence to venture slightly farther out, bobbing peacefully as small waves passed beneath. Her niece played in the shallows nearby, building sand structures and collecting shells. When the lifeguard whistles blew sharply across the beach around 11:20 a.m., most swimmers complied immediately, wading toward shore with children in tow. Thalina had started back as well, pulling Kira by the hand. But as they reached knee depth, she noticed the yellow float drifting past the sandbar, carried by a lateral current. The rental had cost 80 rand, not a fortune, but enough that losing it likely felt wasteful. A lifeguard on the tower shouted through a megaphone for everyone to exit the water completely. Thalina waved acknowledgement, but told her niece to stay on the sand while she retrieved the float. The lifeguard could not physically stop everyone, so she was able to wade back out. Tiger sharks are among the ocean's most opportunistic predators, growing up to 16 feet in length and weighing over 1,400 pounds. Unlike great whites, which prefer cooler waters, tiger sharks thrive in tropical and subtropical zones, particularly along coastlines where murky water provides camouflage for ambush hunting. Their serrated teeth are uniquely adapted to saw through bone and turtle shells. Studies show tiger sharks are attracted to contrasting colors and erratic movements, both of which can trigger investigative bites. She waded back in, moving through waist-deep water with determined strokes. The baitfish activity had intensified, creating small eruptions of silver across the surface about 30 yards to her right. Several beachgoers who had gathered their belongings stopped to watch, some pointing at the unusual fish behavior. One man later told investigators he had considered yelling a warning, but assumed the lifeguards had the situation managed. Thalina reached the float in chest-deep water, roughly 60 feet from shore, and grabbed the slippery plastic handle. At that exact moment, the school of baitfish nearest to her exploded upward in a tight spray, their bodies glinting as they scattered in panic. She turned toward shore, pulling the float alongside her body. The water surged violently to her left without warning. A tiger shark, later estimated at approximately 11 feet based on bite radius, rose from below in a sudden upward rush, its mouth already open. The impact threw Thelina upward at an angle, her torso bending sharply backward as the shark's jaws clamped across her midsection just below the ribcage. The bright yellow float flipped free, spinning across the surface. Witnesses on shore saw her upper body jerk violently as the animal bit down with crushing force, its serrated teeth sawing through flesh. The shark twisted sharply to the right, a characteristic tearing motion, and the water around her turned white with foam and then deep red. Her upper body disappeared beneath the surface within seconds as the shark pulled downward, thrashing in short, powerful bursts. The attack was later estimated by witnesses to have lasted only seconds. The water continued to churn for several seconds more, blood spreading rapidly across the surface in an expanding cloud. The medical examination later confirmed catastrophic trauma with substantial tissue loss and multiple deep, jagged lacerations across the abdomen and chest, consistent with repeated bites. Then terribly, everything went still, except for the gentle rocking of the abandoned yellow float. A surfer positioned about 120 feet down the beach had watched the attack unfold. He paddled frantically toward shore, screaming for help before he even reached the sand. Lifeguards activated emergency sirens within seconds of his alert. 2 rescue jet skis, already staged on the beach, launched from the tower station, arriving at the attack site in roughly 4 minutes. They found only the blood slick and the float. One guard reported seeing a large dark shape moving deeper into murky water beyond the sandbar. They recovered no immediate remains. A dive team deployed 40 minutes later located the remains approximately 200 yards offshore in 18 feet of water. The medical examiner reported catastrophic trauma with substantial tissue loss, consistent with a large shark attack. Beach authorities closed roughly 2 miles of coastline for 48 hours, while shark nets were inspected and patrols increased. Local news outlets ran brief reports about the incident, but avoided graphic detail at the family's request. The evening of April 22, 2016, brought perfect conditions to the remote coastline near Hana, Maui. A gentle trade wind rustled through the palm trees as the sun painted the sky in brilliant tropical colors. Christian Smith, 24, couldn't have asked for better conditions for his solo fishing adventure at one of his secret spots along Maui's untouched coastline. Christian embodied the laid-back Hawaiian lifestyle that drew so many to the islands. With his easy smile and encyclopedic knowledge of hidden fishing spots, he had become a local favorite at the surf shop where he worked. Friends described him as fearless and independent, always venturing to remote locations that other anglers avoided, constantly searching for the perfect fishing experience that only the islands could provide. That evening, Christian loaded his truck with heavy tackle designed for the large predatory fish that hunted Hawaiian waters after dark. The location he'd chosen was breathtakingly beautiful, but completely isolated, a secluded beach accessible only by a rough dirt road winding through dense tropical vegetation. Christian arrived just as darkness was settling over the ocean. The spot was perfect, a protected cove with deep water close to shore and a coral reef that attracted schools of baitfish during night hours. He set up his gear methodically, rigging the heavy equipment he'd need for the monsters that prowled these waters after sunset. As Christian waded into about 6 feet of crystal-clear water to cast beyond the reef break, everything seemed perfect. The water was so clear he could see the white sand bottom even in starlight, and he'd already landed 2 nice fish when disaster struck. Moving through the water to reposition for a better cast, Christian's foot slipped on wet volcanic rock. He fell hard against sharp coral formations, opening a deep gash on his leg. Blood immediately began streaming into the pristine water around him. Local Hawaiian fishermen had warned about increased predator activity during night hours, but Christian had fished these waters countless times. What he didn't know was that the remote location had become a hunting ground for one of the ocean's most dangerous predators. As Christian tried to assess his injury in the dim light, he realized the cut was deeper than expected. His splashing and the metallic scent of blood created the perfect storm of stimuli that trigger a predator's hunting instincts. Unknown to Christian, he had attracted the attention of Hawaii's apex predator. Tiger sharks are perfectly adapted for nighttime hunting, in both shallow and deep waters, earning the nickname wastebasket of the sea because they'll eat virtually anything. Their stomachs have contained license plates, tires, and even other sharks. These massive sharks can grow up to 18 feet long and possess an indiscriminate appetite that makes them particularly deadly during nighttime hours when they move into shallow water to hunt. Tiger sharks can detect blood from several hundred yards away, and their lateral line system senses the slightest vibrations in the water, making escape nearly impossible once they lock onto a target. Christian began wading toward shore, but his movements became increasingly erratic as blood loss affected his coordination. The coral cut was more serious than he'd thought, and the metallic scent drifting through the water was like ringing a dinner bell for every predator in the area. The 10-foot tiger shark had been patrolling the reef edge when Christian's blood trail reached its sensitive nostrils. Unlike more cautious reef sharks, tiger sharks are known for their bold, reckless approach to anything in their territory, especially during nighttime hunting hours when they become most active. Christian never saw death coming through the dark water. The attack was sudden and devastating. The tiger shark struck from the side, its massive jaws clamping down on his injured leg with crushing force. The impact knocked Christian off his feet, sending him tumbling in the deeper water. The predator's attack was relentless and indiscriminate. Tiger sharks are known for their tenacious grip, often holding prey while using their muscular bodies to roll and tear. The shark maintained its grip while striking with its powerful tail, creating a whirlpool of violence. What makes tiger shark attacks particularly horrific is their feeding behavior. Once they taste blood, they enter a feeding frenzy, biting repeatedly until prey stops moving. Christian fought desperately, but the predator's grip was unbreakable, and each movement only intensified the attack. In the darkness of the remote beach, Christian's screams echoed across empty coastline, but no one was there to hear them. The tiger shark continued its brutal assault, its indiscriminate appetite making escape impossible. When morning came, Christian's truck was found at the end of the dirt road, his fishing gear still on the beach. But Christian had vanished without a trace, claimed by waters that had given him so much joy. His disappearance sparked a massive search involving helicopters and hundreds of volunteers. His body was found 4 days later on a beach 8 miles away. The Hawaiian community held a traditional blessing ceremony, and his surf shop colleagues created a memorial fund for ocean safety education.